When consciousness returned, it did not come gently. It arrived in sharp, disjointed fragments like someone flipping through channels on a broken television. The first thing I felt was the cold. It seeped through the thin hospital blanket clinging to my skin as if it wanted to anchor me in place. The second thing was the light, a harsh fluorescent glare above me that stabbed through my eyelids until I blinked them open. My vision wavered, colors bleeding into each other before shapes sharpened into the familiar sterile ceiling tiles of an emergency room. A steady beeping pulsed near my ear, rising and falling like an anxious heartbeat. I tried to swallow, but my throat burned as if I had inhaled smoke. My lips felt cracked and swollen. There was a metallic taste in my mouth, coppery and bitter. I lifted my hand instinctively to wipe it away, but pain shot through my arm, blooming up to my shoulder. I winced. A woman's voice drifted in soft and warm. "Sweetheart, can you hear me?" I forced my eyes toward the sound. A nurse in light blue scrubs leaned over me, her expression gentle but focused. She looked like someone who had said those same words 1,000 times but still meant them every single time. I tried to answer, but the only thing that came out was a raw whisper. She smiled reassuringly. "You're in the ER. You're safe. You had a head injury. Just breathe slowly for me." Safe. The word echoed through my mind, hollow and unfamiliar. Safe was not something I felt very often. My chest rose and fell unevenly as I tried to center myself, but memories crashed over me without warning. Music from my birthday party, the smell of spilled beer, laughter turning into shouting. Greg's voice slurred and venomous. "You were never mine. You are a mistake. I should have never raised you." His face twisted in anger, his eyes wild with drunken fury. Then the moment when everything tilted, a shove, a table's edge slamming into my skull, darkness swallowing me whole. My breath hitched. Panic rippled through my body. I tried to sit up. The nurse pressed a hand to my shoulder, holding me down with careful firmness. "Easy. You need to stay still. You have a concussion." My heart hammered against my ribs. I licked my dry lips, tasting blood again. "Is he here?" My voice cracked. The nurse paused as if choosing her words. "Who, Greg?" I whispered. Even saying his name made my stomach tighten. The nurse's expression softened with recognition. She shook her head. "No, he is not here. You are safe from him." Relief hit me so hard it almost hurt. But before I could exhale fully, the nurse added, "Your father is here, though." My blood turned cold. My heartbeat sped up again, each beep of the monitor louder than the one before. My father, the man who never cared if I came home late, the man who only spoke to me to remind me that I was not his, the man who called me a waste of space more times than he ever said my name. Why would he be here? What did he want now? My hands began to shake. The nurse must have seen the fear on my face because she leaned closer. "If you want, I can ask him to step out until you're ready." "No," I whispered automatically. "Please, keep him away from me." The nurse blinked, then shook her head gently. "Madison, the man who is here is not the one who brought you in." Confusion flickered through me, cutting through the fear. Not Greg. If it was not him, then who could she possibly mean? Before I could ask, the curtain at the edge of the room rustled. A tall figure stepped into the small space, and everything inside me stilled. He looked nothing like Greg. His posture was steady, controlled. He wore a dark suit that did not belong in a hospital and carried himself with a quiet composure that felt completely foreign in my chaotic world. His hair was dark with threads of gray, and his jaw was sharp, almost elegant. But it was his eyes that caught me, deep, steady blue. Eyes that held a strange mixture of fear, hope, and something I had never seen directed at me before. Genuine concern. He froze when he saw me, his breath visibly catching. "Madison." The way he said my name made my heart stutter. It was careful, reverent, almost as if he had practiced it in his mind for years. I stared at him wide-eyed, searching for answers in a face I did not recognize but somehow seemed familiar. He took a hesitant step forward, then another, stopping at the foot of my bed. "I know this is a shock," he said quietly. "I know you're hurt and confused." His voice trembled with emotion he was trying hard to control. He placed a hand over his chest, steadying himself. "But you deserve the truth." My breath caught. He looked at me with eyes full of longing and regret. "Madison, I am your real father." The world tilted again, but this time from disbelief rather than impact. My real father. Standing here, watching me, waiting. Everything I thought I knew cracked open in an instant, and nothing would ever be the same. The hours before I woke up in the ER felt distant, like scenes from someone else's life playing behind fogged glass, but the more the medication wore off, the clearer those memories became. My 18th birthday was supposed to mark a beginning, a turning point, a symbolic step toward adulthood. Instead, it became the unraveling of every lie I had been forced to live with. It started in the late afternoon when the early spring sky still held a pale warmth and the house buzzed with the low hum of forced celebration. Balloons in mismatched colors were taped along the walls. A banner with my name hung crookedly above the kitchen doorway, the letters uneven because Tyler, my younger half-brother, had insisted on cutting them himself. My mother Evelyn smoothed the edges, trying to make everything look perfect for me, even though nothing in our lives had been perfect for a long time. She smiled as she carried a tray of snacks to the dining table, but the smile did not reach her eyes. She kept glancing toward the living room where Greg sat in his recliner with a beer already in his hand, despite the fact that guests were not even due for another hour. Lorraine, my stepmother and self-proclaimed keeper of the household, fluttered around him like some loyal attendant, adjusting his collar and fixing the cushions behind him as if he were royalty instead of the angry alcoholic who dictated the tone of every single day of our lives. I stayed out of sight in the hallway watching from a distance. I learned long ago that the best way to avoid trouble was to be small, quiet, invisible. But today was supposed to be about me. At least, that was the pretense my mother tried to maintain. She kept saying words like, "Let's enjoy today, and you deserve this, and it is your day," even though she seemed more afraid than excited. The doorbell rang at 5:30. A few of my classmates arrived first, then neighbors, then relatives of Lorraine people who never bothered to hide the fact that they preferred Tyler over me because he looked like Greg and acted like Greg and carried the Mercer family bloodline. To them, I was simply the extra one, the unnecessary one, the burden who complicated holiday seating charts. I tried to mingle, tried to smile, tried to act normal. I stood near the kitchen counter holding a cup of soda, pretending to listen to two girls from my math class talk about college applications. But every time Greg's laughter boomed from the living room, my shoulders tightened a little more. By 6:30, he was already on his fourth beer. By 7, his speech had begun to slur. By 7:15, he had switched to whiskey. The first comment came casually tossed into the air like a joke meant for the whole room. "Madison is finally 18, he said loudly, raising his glass. 18 years of doing my civic duty." A few people chuckled awkwardly, unsure how to respond. My mother froze mid-step, the bowl of chips in her hands trembling slightly. Lorraine gave Greg a light pat on the arm. "Oh, stop," she said in a sing-song voice that made my stomach turn. "You sound like she was such a burden," Greg snorted. "I never said she was not a burden." The room went silent for a second before conversation resumed in forced, fragmented pieces. I felt heat rise in my cheeks, but I kept my head down. I had survived worse. I could survive this. The problem was that Greg was not finished. He never was. The more he drank, the more truth spilled out of him like poison. Every time I passed through the room, even to grab a napkin or refill my cup, his eyes followed me with the same bitter resentment he had carried for years. At one point, he muttered to a guest loud enough for me to hear, 18 years stuck raising someone else's kid. Maddie should be grateful she lasted this long. My mother closed her eyes, a silent flinch, but she did not speak. She never did. Later, when it was time to bring out the cake, she tried to salvage the moment. She lit the candles and carried it toward me, her hands shaking slightly. "Happy birthday, sweetheart," she whispered. The lights dimmed. Everyone gathered. I inhaled deeply, wishing for just one peaceful minute. But the wish never made it past my lips. Greg pushed through the crowd, whiskey glass in hand, stumbling slightly as he positioned himself across from me. "Make a wish," he said loudly, pointing his glass at me like it was some kind of weapon. "Wish to stop being such a disappointment." The laughter that erupted was not malicious, just uncomfortable, the kind of nervous chuckle people give when they do not know what else to do. But it cut all the same. Mom stepped forward. "Greg, please not tonight." He ignored her. I stared at the candles, willing myself not to cry. I blew them out quickly, hoping the moment would end. It did not. Greg leaned forward, squinting at me like he was examining something distasteful. "You know what the real mistake was," he said. "Bringing you into this house, raising you like you were mine." His voice rose. "You are not mine. Never have been. Never will be." The room went dead quiet. My heart pounded so loudly I thought everyone could hear it. Tyler looked confused, glancing between us. Lorraine tried to pull Greg back, but he shrugged her off. My mother whispered his name in a broken plea. Then everything escalated at once. Greg stepped closer, his face inches from mine. "You should thank me for every meal, every roof, every dollar. I did more than your real father ever did." I backed up instinctively, but the edge of the table pressed against my legs. Greg's hand shot out, grabbing my forearm. I yelped in pain. "Let her go!" my mother said, her voice trembling but louder this time. Greg shoved me backward, hard. My body hit the table, knocking plates to the floor, the impact sending a shock of pain up my spine. Conversations stopped. Someone gasped. A glass shattered. My vision blurred for a second, but cleared just enough for me to see Greg pointing at me, rage twisting his features. "You are a mistake. You always have been." That was the last thing I heard clearly before everything tilted again. My mother screamed. A neighbor shouted to call 911. My head struck something sharp, and the world went dark. When people imagine a mother, they imagine safety. They imagine soft hands, warm hugs, whispered comfort after bad dreams. They imagine someone who steps between you and danger, someone who would rather bleed than watch you hurt. I used to imagine that too. I used to cling to the idea that my mother would protect me the way mothers were supposed to. But growing up in Greg's house taught me a different truth, one that settled in my bones long before I understood it. My mother loved me. She loved me fiercely, but she was a woman who had spent too many years learning how to survive, and sometimes survival meant silence. Sometimes survival meant looking away. Long before my 18th birthday party, long before the shove that sent me spiraling into the ER, my life was shaped by moments where my mother tried to stand up for me but could not, or would not, or was too afraid to even try. The earliest memory I have of her crying was on a rainy evening when I was 9. I was in my room, coloring at my desk, when I heard a crash downstairs, followed by Greg's raised voice. I remember padding down the hallway, the carpet scratching my bare feet and peeking through the staircase railing. Greg stood in the kitchen, rage twisting his face as he shouted at my mother about a dinner she had burned. It was such a small thing, such an absurd spark for the wildfire of his anger. She stood very still, shoulders hunched, eyes pointed to the floor. When he finally stormed off to the living room, she leaned over the sink, gripping the edge with both trembling hands, and cried silently. I walked downstairs slowly and put my arms around her waist. She jumped, startled, then turned and hugged me so tightly I could barely breathe. "I am so sorry," she whispered into my hair, as if she had done something wrong, as if she were apologizing for his behavior. That was the first time I understood that her love for me did not make her strong enough to fight him. That same pattern played out over and over again throughout my childhood. Whenever Greg lashed out, she absorbed the impact. Whenever he insulted me, she pretended not to hear. Whenever he threatened to take something from me, she begged quietly behind closed doors. She did not confront him. She negotiated with him. She bargained with a man who never kept his promises. When I turned 12, I wanted to join the art club at school. I had shown my mother the permission slip with excitement, explaining how much I wanted to learn painting. She smiled and signed it immediately, happy to see me happy. But when Greg found the slip on the counter, he tore it in half. Waste of time, waste of money, waste of space. My mother stood there frozen, her face drained. She followed him to the living room, pleading softly. Just let her go 1 day a week. It means so much to her. Greg did not even look up from the television. If you want her to go so bad, you pay for it. My mother went quiet because she knew she had no money of her own. Greg controlled everything. He held the household finances with an iron grip, giving her a small allowance every week and demanding receipts afterward. That night, she tiptoed into my room and sat on the edge of my bed. "I am sorry, baby," she said, brushing my hair back. "Maybe next year." I nodded, even though I knew next year would be no different. Her apologies piled up like fallen leaves, soft but useless. By the time I was 15, the dynamic in our home was painfully clear. Greg ruled. My mother obeyed. I endured. There was one night, though, that stayed with me more vividly than all the rest. It was the night she gave me $20 for lunch money she had secretly saved by skipping meals herself. She placed the bill in my hand before school and said, "Do not tell Greg." I knew the risk she was taking. He had a vicious temper when he discovered anything she did without his permission. That afternoon, he came home early and checked her purse. I knew something was wrong when I heard my name echo across the house, shouted with enough force to rattle the windows. My mother appeared in my doorway moments later, her expression stricken. "Madison, do not come downstairs," she whispered. "Stay here. Promise me." I froze in place, listening as Greg's fury thundered below. He accused her of hiding money, of being sneaky, of trying to turn me against him. She apologized over and over, her voice shaking, trying to calm him down. The argument lasted nearly an hour. When she finally came back upstairs, her eyes were red, and her hands were shaking so much she struggled to open my door. She tried to smile, but it fell apart before it formed. "I am okay," she insisted, even though it was clear she was not. She had tried to do one small thing for me, and she suffered for it. From that night on, I never let myself forget that while my mother loved me, she was trapped. Greg kept her isolated. He monitored her phone, discouraged her from calling relatives, and convinced her she could not survive without him. Abuse is not always bruises. Sometimes it is the sinking realization that the person you depend on is the same person who breaks you. As I got older, the cracks between us widened. I started to resent her silence, her tears, her apologies. I started to resent how she kept telling me to lower my voice, soften my tone, stay out of Greg's way. It felt like she cared more about avoiding his anger than protecting me from it. But then there were nights when she crept into my room long after Greg fell asleep. She would sit at the edge of my bed, touch the back of my hand, and whisper, "I am sorry, I cannot be stronger. I am trying. I love you more than anything in this world." And I would feel the guilt settle in. She was not the villain. She was another victim. But even victims can fail the people they love. When I think back to my birthday party, to the moment Greg shoved me into the table, I do not just remember his rage. I remember my mother's scream. I remember her grabbing his arm, telling him to stop. I remember her collapsing to her knees beside me, her hands shaking as she tried to lift my head. I remember her crying my name like it was the last prayer she had left. And all I could think before everything went dark was that she was still too late. She loved me, but she could not save me. And that was the truth that hurt most of all. Fear was the background noise of my childhood, a constant low hum that never fully faded, even on the days when Greg seemed calm or distracted or momentarily satisfied. People think fear is sharp, something that hits suddenly like a jolt of electricity. But in our house, it seeped into everything slowly, like dampness creeping up a wall. It settled into routine. It shaped the way I breathed, the way I moved, the way I spoke. It taught me that danger did not always announce itself with fists or screams. Sometimes it whispered. Sometimes it waited. I learned that lesson when I was 8 years old, long before I understood why Greg's eyes hardened whenever he looked at me. Back then, I still thought he was just in a bad mood, or tired from work, or upset about something I did not understand. It took years for me to realize he resented me simply for existing. The first memory that truly marked me came on a snowy December afternoon. I had just come home from school still wearing my puffy purple coat and carrying a drawing I was proud of. I had spent all week working on it, a watercolor landscape with a sunrise. I wanted to show my mother. But when I walked into the kitchen, she was chopping vegetables, glancing nervously toward the living room, where Greg sat watching television. She smiled at me, but her eyes were tense. I pulled the drawing from my backpack anyway. "Mom, look." She reached for the paper, her expression brightening just a little. Greg happened to glance over at that exact moment. "What is that?" His tone was not curious. It was accusatory. My mother stiffened. "It is just her art project." He took a swig of his beer and snorted. "Waste of time. She should focus on chores, not childish garbage." My mother squeezed my hand, whispering, "Go to your room, sweetheart." I did not argue. I ran upstairs holding the drawing to my chest, feeling the sting of humiliation before I even understood why his words hurt so much. That night, after Greg fell asleep in his recliner, my mother came into my room and sat beside me on the bed. She smoothed my hair and told me my drawing was beautiful. But the praise felt hollow because it came wrapped in fear. She kept glancing at the door, afraid he would wake up. I knew then that love existed in our house, but safety did not. Another memory that clings to me happened the following winter on a night so cold the wind rattled the windows. I was pouring myself a glass of milk when the carton slipped from my hands and splashed across the floor. I gasped immediately, dropping to my knees to clean it up, but I was too late. Greg stormed into the kitchen. "What the hell are you doing?" I froze, rag in hand. "I am sorry," I whispered. "It was an accident." He scoffed. "You are always an accident." My mother stepped between us, her voice trembling as she said it was just spilled milk. But that only made him angrier. He pointed toward the back door. "Get outside, now!" My mother grabbed my arm. "Greg, she is a child. Please." He shoved her hand away. "She needs to learn consequences. Outside, now!" I looked at my mother silently, begging her to fight harder to stop him to do anything. But I saw the defeat in her eyes, the way fear hollowed her expression. She opened the door and the cold rushed in. I stepped outside. She whispered, "I am sorry," before closing the door. The wind cut through my sweater instantly. The porch was covered in frost, and I pulled my arms tight against my body, shivering so hard my teeth hurt. I stood there for what felt like hours, but was probably 20 minutes. When my mother finally opened the door again, tears streaked her face. She wrapped a blanket around me and helped me inside. She warmed my hands with hers, whispering apologies over and over. But I learned something important that night. Greg was the danger. But sometimes the person who tries to save you can still be too weak to fight for you. The fear did not stop there. As I entered my teens, it evolved. Greg no longer relied on petty punishments or harsh words. His resentment grew bolder, more calculated. He began taking my things without explanation. First my allowance, then my cell phone, then the old laptop my mother had given me that used to belong to her. He claimed it was because I did not deserve luxuries, or because I had broken a rule I did not know existed. Lorraine always backed him up, shaking her head at me like I was the ungrateful one. "Be grateful he lets you live here," she would say. I remember one day when Greg came home early from work. I was sitting at the dining table doing homework. He walked in, looked at my textbooks spread out, and frowned. "Why are you sitting there?" I hesitated. "Doing homework." He slammed his keys on the counter. "At the table." "The table is for family. Go somewhere else." I gathered my books quickly, holding back tears. My mother did not say anything. She was washing dishes, staring into the sink, as though if she kept her eyes on the water long enough, she would disappear inside it. Even Tyler, who was still young at the time, noticed. He would ask why Greg was always mad at me. Lorraine told him not to question things he could not understand. But children understand more than adults expect. Once, when I was 13, Tyler slipped a granola bar under my door after I was sent to my room without dinner. The note said, "I am sorry Dad is mean. Do not tell Mom." It broke my heart because he was apologizing for a man he admired, a man who treated him like gold while treating me like dirt, and I understood that dynamic well. Tyler was Greg's real child. I was the reminder of something Greg despised. He never hid that fact. When I was 14, I overheard him tell Lorraine, "I cannot stand looking at her. Every time I do, I remember exactly why I should have trusted my instincts." Lorraine whispered something back, but he continued, "She is not mine. She never will be." My mother must have heard him too, because she avoided my eyes for the rest of the night. I stayed in my room hugging a pillow, wondering what about me was so unlovable. But the truth was not about me. It was about him. Greg needed someone to hurt, someone to blame, someone to break so he could feel powerful, and I was the easiest target. The fear became a second skin. I learned how to walk quietly, how to breathe silently, how to gauge the temperature of his mood by the sound of his footsteps, how to stay out of the way, how not to show emotion because emotions made him angry. I learned to survive in a house that was never mine to belong to. Those years shaped everything that came after. They laid the foundation for the night of my 18th birthday, the night Greg finally snapped in front of everyone. The night he said the one thing he had always wanted to say out loud. "You are a mistake." It was not new. It was not surprising. It was simply the truth spoken without disguise. And as hard as it was to hear, it was the moment my life began to change. The moment the fear that ruled my childhood finally collided with the truth that had been waiting for me all along. Control in Greg's house was never loud or obvious. It was not always shouting or slamming doors or punishments you could see. Most of the time, it crept in quietly, slipping into the corners of daily life until it became impossible to tell where his rules ended and where my freedom began. By the time I turned 15, control was the air I breathed. Greg treated the house like a kingdom and himself like a ruler whose authority could not be challenged. He decided who spoke, who stayed silent, who was allowed what and when. Lorraine reinforced every command like a loyal guard dog, and my mother, trapped and exhausted, drifted through the days with the weight of his rules pressing down on her shoulders. For me, control started small. Little things, when I could eat, when I could shower, how long I could spend in my room, whether I could shut the door, what clothes were acceptable. At first, I tried to reason with him, but logic never mattered. His decisions were not about fairness or practicality. They were about reminding me that everything I had existed only because he allowed it. One of the first major signs of that was my phone. I got my first cell phone at 13, a used one from a family friend. It had cracks along the side and the battery barely held a charge, but I loved it because it felt like a tiny piece of independence. My mother let me keep it, promising she would help pay for a basic prepaid plan. But when Greg found out, he demanded to see it. He turned it over in his hands with an expression of disgust, as if touching something contaminated. "Who gave you permission to have this?" I told him the truth. "A friend's mom." He scoffed. "Friends? You do not need friends. You need discipline." He took the phone upstairs to his room and locked it in a drawer. For months, I had no access to it. My mother tried to speak to him about it one evening, but it only escalated his temper. "If she wants a phone, she can earn it," he said. "She is not getting handouts." After that night, she did not bring it up again. That became the pattern for everything I wanted. When I asked for new shoes because mine had torn at the seams, Greg said, "Tape them." When I needed supplies for school, he said, "Use what you have." When I told him I wanted to take SAT prep classes, he said, "College is not for everyone." Translation, not for you. I remember the day I stood at the kitchen counter with the SAT registration form, my heart racing as I approached him. The deadline was in 2 weeks. I explained the cost, the importance, the fact that I had good grades. He did not even look up from the newspaper. "Get a job." I swallowed hard. "I cannot work enough hours before the deadline. I need the money now. Tyler needs new cleats." That was all he said. That was always his answer. "Tyler needs this. Tyler deserves that. Tyler gets priority." I got nothing. So I found a part-time job at a small cafe called Morning Bean, sweeping floors and wiping tables for minimum wage. It took me 3 months to save enough for the test fee and the prep book. 3 months of coming home exhausted, smelling like coffee grounds, only to hear Greg complain that I was never around to help with chores. Even when I contributed financially, he found a way to make it seem like a burden. Control was never about money. It was about power. When I turned 15, he escalated. That was the year he made a show of taking away all of my electronics. He gathered my phone, my laptop, my tablet, everything into a box and told me, "You do not need distractions. Respect is earned." Lorraine nodded approvingly at his side arms crossed like she was watching a misbehaving student being disciplined. I stared at the box, swallowing the rising panic. Those items were not luxuries. They were my connection to the outside world. They were my escape. Taking them felt like cutting off the last thread of independence I had left. That same year, my mother gifted me her old laptop. She had saved it from when she used to work part-time before Greg pressured her into staying home. It was outdated and slow, but to me, it was priceless. She handed it to me quietly one afternoon when Greg was still at work. "Use this for school," she said, eyes filled with hope. "Maybe it will help you get the future you deserve. I should have hidden it better." 2 weeks later, Greg found it under my bed. He stormed into the living room holding it by the corner like it was evidence of a crime. "Where did she get this?" My mother tried to answer him, but he cut her off. "I make the decisions here, not you." He snapped the laptop shut, then tucked it under his arm. I never saw it again. Lorraine watched with a satisfied look as though taking something from me made the house more orderly. She had a habit of echoing Greg's authority, feeding his ego. She once told me, "There is no reason for you to have your own things. Everything in this house belongs to Greg, including you." That was the moment I understood the truth. I was not a daughter in Greg's home. I was property, a responsibility he resented but controlled anyway so he could remind himself he was in charge. And as I grew older, his grip tightened. It was not enough for him to control my things. He wanted to control my future, my opportunities, my choices, my voice. Everything I did had to pass through him first. But no matter how hard he tried to suffocate me, a small part of me kept resisting. Quietly, steadily, waiting for the day when his control would finally break. And that day came sooner than he ever expected. The secret box entered my life quietly, without warning, like a tiny crack forming beneath the surface of a frozen lake. You cannot see the danger right away, but once the ice begins to shift, everything that was buried beneath it starts to rise. I was 17 the night my mother placed it in my hands, but the truth, locked inside it, had been waiting for me far longer. It happened on a cold evening in early March, less than a year before my 18th birthday. Greg was out drinking with coworkers, and Lorraine had taken Tyler to a birthday party across town. Those rare moments without them felt like borrowed freedom, the kind that made the house seem lighter and my mother seem almost like the version of herself she used to be before Greg's shadow swallowed her. She knocked on my bedroom door gently, which already told me something was wrong. She never knocked unless she needed privacy. I opened the door and found her standing there with tears in her eyes and something clutched tightly to her chest. It was a small wooden box, dark cherry, colored with a delicate rose carved into the lid. The edges were worn smooth, old enough to belong to a different life. A life before Greg. She stepped inside and closed the door quietly behind her. Her hands shook as she held out the box to me. "Maddie, I need you to listen." Her voice wavered. I nodded, confused. She placed the box into my hands, and it felt heavier than it should have been, as if the wood carried the weight of everything she had been too afraid to say. "You cannot open this yet," she whispered. "Not until your 18th birthday. Promise me." I stared at her, startled. "Why?" She looked toward the door as though Greg might appear at any moment. "Because it is not safe for you to know now." Her words struck something cold inside me. Not safe. The house suddenly felt smaller, the walls closer, the air thicker. I asked her what was inside. She shook her head. "I cannot tell you, but this will explain everything. Every choice I made. Every reason I stayed. Every reason I could not protect you the way you deserved. There were 1,000 questions fighting to escape my mouth. But the look on her face stopped me. I had seen fear on my mother before, but never like this. This fear was deep-rooted familiar in a way that made my stomach clench. I promised her I would wait. She exhaled shakily, like she had been holding her breath for years. "Hide it somewhere he will never find it," she said. "And whatever happens, do not let Greg know it exists. If he finds it, everything will get worse." Then she hugged me tighter than she had in a long time and left the room without another word. That night, I sat on my bed holding the box, feeling the subtle grooves of the carved rose beneath my fingertips. I shook it gently. There was something inside, several things maybe shifting softly against the wooden walls. I wanted desperately to open it, to tear it open even, but I had made a promise. And in a house full of broken trust, my mother's plea was the one thing I could not betray. So I hid the box under the loose floorboard in my closet, wrapped inside an old sweater. For months, it stayed there buried, but never forgotten. Sometimes I would take it out late at night just to hold it, to feel like there was something in my life that belonged to me, something Greg had no control over. Counting down to my 18th birthday became a ritual. Every day that passed felt like one step closer to answers, one step closer to understanding why Greg despised me, why my mother lived in fear, why our family felt like a wound that never healed. But even as the date approached, part of me worried about what was waiting for me inside the box. Secrets do not stay quiet because they are harmless. They stay quiet because they can destroy everything once they surface. The night before my birthday, Greg was already drinking, irritated by something at work. Lorraine hovered around him, trying to soothe him the way she always did. My mother moved silently through the house, stealing glances at me, her eyes full of something I could not name. Fear, regret, hope, maybe all three. At midnight, when everyone else was asleep, I crept to my closet and lifted the floorboard. The box was still there, untouched. My heart pounded as I held it in my hands, knowing that tomorrow everything could change. The next morning, chaos broke loose. Greg's drinking, the insults, the explosion at my birthday party, the shove, the fall, the darkness, and then the ER. When I woke up in this hospital, I remembered the box instantly, as if my mind had tied the two events together. One held the truth. The other held the consequences of living without it. 2 days later, when I was finally discharged and my mother came to drive me home, she sat in the hospital parking lot, gripping the steering wheel so tightly her knuckles turned white. I thought she was about to cry again, but instead she whispered, "Get the box as soon as you can. Do not wait for me. Do not show it to Greg. He cannot see it." Her voice trembled, but the urgency beneath it was sharp and unmistakable. I asked her why. She closed her eyes. "Because he threatened me because of it. Because he threatened you." That was the first time she ever admitted aloud that Greg's cruelty had crossed a line deeper than insults or punishments, that he had used fear as a weapon not just against her, but against who I was. That night, after everyone fell asleep, I retrieved the box from my closet and finally opened it. Inside, I found the truth I had been waiting for my entire life. A photograph of my mother when she was younger, smiling in a way I had never seen her smile around Greg. And beside her stood a man I had never met, but whose eyes looked hauntingly familiar. A letter lay underneath the picture, worn at the edges from being handled too many times. It was addressed to me, and the first sentence shattered everything. "Greg is not your father." The moment I read the first line of the letter, my entire world seemed to tilt, as if the ground beneath me had been quietly cracking for years and now finally split open. Greg is not your father. 6 words. 6 simple, devastating words that explained 18 years of confusion and misery in a single breath. I read them again and again until the letters blurred. My heartbeat thundered in my ears, drowning out everything else. My hands trembled so hard the paper crinkled between my fingers. The next lines were written in my mother's neat, familiar handwriting, but the words felt foreign, weighty, too honest for the silent woman I grew up with. "I never wanted to hide this from you, Madison," the letter continued. "I wanted to tell you every day. I wanted to tell you from the moment I held you for the first time. But Greg found out before I had the chance. He threatened me. He threatened to take you. He threatened to ruin both our lives if I ever contacted the man who should have been your real father." My breath hitched as I read on. She had written about a man named Jonathan Pierce. She described him as kind, ambitious, gentle. A man she met when she was 22. A man she cared for deeply. A man who never knew I existed. I traced his name with my thumb, my mind racing. The photograph beneath the letter showed my mother and this man standing close together on a beach, sunlight falling across their faces. They looked happy, carefree even, and the man Jonathan had the same blue eyes that had stared back at me in the ER 2 nights earlier. I felt the truth settle in my chest like a stone dropping into deep water. He had not been lying. The man from the ER. The stranger who looked at me like I was the most important thing in that room. The man who said he was my real father. My mother wrote the letter before she married Greg, before fear strangled her voice, before our lives became a cycle of silence and survival. She said she had kept the box hidden for years, afraid Greg would find it. She said she wanted me to read it at 18 because that was the age where Greg would no longer have legal control over me. She believed that knowledge would give me freedom. Instead, it felt like breaking. I sat on my bed, clutching the letter to my chest as tears streamed down my face. Not because I was sad, not because I was overwhelmed, but because for the first time, everything made sense. Greg's hatred, his resentment, his coldness, his constant punishment, his obsession with control, his refusal to help me with school or activities or anything that required effort or care. I had spent years asking myself what was wrong with me. Now I finally understood. There had never been anything wrong with me. There had always been something wrong with him. That realization was both liberating and terrifying. I carefully placed the letter back in the box along with the picture. Then I pulled out the final item hidden at the bottom, a business card, cream-colored, minimalist, elegant, Jonathan Pierce, Chief Executive Officer, Pierce and Maddox Holdings. The number printed at the bottom felt like a door I had never known existed, a door Greg had spent his entire life blocking. I stared at the card for a long time, my thumb brushing over the embossed lettering. Should I call him? Should I reach out? What if he did not want me? What if he had moved on? What if learning about me brought chaos into a life he had carefully built? But then another thought hit me. What if he had been waiting? What if he always wondered? What if he never even knew he had a daughter? My mother's letter had said he deserved to know, and deep down I knew she was right. I was owed answers, not only for myself, but for her. She had sacrificed her own voice, her own freedom to protect me. The least I could do was take the steps she never could. My fingers shook as I opened my laptop and typed the name Jonathan Pierce into the search bar. Thousands of results appeared instantly. Articles, interviews, panels, business announcements, photos from company galas, charity events, magazine covers. He was successful, respected. A man who had built an empire in the renewable energy sector, the kind of man Greg would have hated on sight. My breath caught when I found a picture of him taken only 6 months ago. He stood at a podium addressing an audience wearing a tailored suit. Those same blue eyes, the same jaw structure, the resemblance between us was undeniable. My chest tightened. He looked like someone whose life had direction and stability, someone who cared about things larger than himself, someone who could have been a father. I scrolled through articles for what felt like hours, learning everything I could. His company, his philanthropy, his reputation. There was no sign of a family in any of the press releases. No wife, no children, no mention of the life he might have had with my mother if things had been different. My stomach twisted with a strange mixture of hope and fear. Eventually, I stopped searching and pulled out the business card again. I knew calling directly would be reckless. I had just woken up from an ER visit. I was emotionally raw. I did not want to make a mistake. So instead, I wrote a letter. A real, physical letter. I sat at my desk with a pen, the box beside me, the lamp casting a warm glow on the paper. I explained who I was. I explained that I had found the letter my mother wrote. I explained that I did not want anything from him, only the truth. I included a copy of my mother's letter and the photograph, but I did not include my phone number. I gave him only my mailing address. If he wanted contact, he would reach out. If he did not, I would take that silence as my answer. When I sealed the envelope, my heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. I hesitated at the mailbox for almost 5 minutes before I finally slid the letter in and let it disappear inside. For the next 2 weeks, I checked the mailbox every day. Nothing. No letter, no reply. No sign that he had even received it. My hope began to wilt. Maybe he did not believe me. Maybe he did not want the complication I represented. Or maybe, I thought bitterly, he realized exactly what a mistake Greg always said I was. But then one afternoon my phone rang. A number with an area code I did not recognize. When I answered, a calm, professional voice said, "Hello, Madison. My name is Natalie Grayson. I am calling on behalf of Jonathan Pierce." And everything inside me shifted. When I heard the name Jonathan Pierce spoken aloud by someone other than myself, I forgot how to breathe. It felt unreal, like a dream I had stepped into without warning. Natalie Grayson introduced herself as his legal counsel, her voice steady and practiced the kind of voice that belonged to someone who handled crises and high-stakes situations for a living. She explained that Jonathan had received my letter along with the enclosed documents and that he had taken them very seriously. My pulse quickened as she spoke. I gripped the edge of my desk to steady myself. For days, I had convinced myself that silence meant rejection. Now, hearing her tone, I realized silence had meant careful consideration. "Mr. Pierce would like to arrange a DNA test," she said. "He believes this step is necessary not only to confirm the truth, but to ensure full legal clarity should you wish to pursue a relationship." I swallowed hard, my throat tightening. "A relationship." The word echoed through me like a shockwave. It was strange hearing it referenced so clinically, yet it was the first time anyone had said it aloud as if it were possible. Something in my chest softened. It felt like hope. A fragile, trembling hope I had not allowed myself to imagine. Natalie told me the test would be handled at a private accredited facility called Summit Diagnostics located downtown. The appointment was already scheduled for the following Tuesday. She paused, then added gently, "Mr. Pierce will be present if you're comfortable with that." I froze. The idea of seeing him again, not by accident like in the ER, but deliberately, intentionally, made my stomach twist. But the image of his eyes in that hospital room, full of something I had never seen before, steadied me. I whispered, "Yes, I'm comfortable." After we hung up, I sat in stunned silence, staring at the phone in my hand. I felt something shift inside me, something that had been dormant for years. Possibility. Tuesday arrived faster than I expected. My mother had offered to drive me, but I told her it was something I needed to do alone. She understood, though. Worry clung to her like a shadow. She cupped my face in her hands before I left and whispered, "No matter what the test says, you're mine. You'll always be mine." Her voice cracked in a way that made my heart ache. The testing center sat on the 20th floor of a sleek office building with glass walls that reflected the sky. The receptionist greeted me politely and directed me to a private waiting room. I stepped inside and stopped short. Jonathan was already there. He stood when I entered, his posture straight, but his expression vulnerable, as if he had rehearsed this moment 1,000 times and still did not know how to begin. Seeing him again sent a strange wave of emotion through me. He looked the same as he had in the ER, composed but aching beneath the surface, his blue eyes tracking every movement I made. "Madison," he said softly. My name sounded different from him, gentle, weighted, real. I nodded, unable to find my voice. He gestured to a seat beside him. "Thank you for coming." We sat in quiet for several seconds, both of us searching for words that did not exist. Finally, he spoke again. "I want you to know, I had no idea your mother was pregnant. If I had known, everything would have been different." I studied him closely, trying to decipher whether he was telling the truth, but the pain in his voice was unmistakable. This was not a rehearsed line. It was regret raw and years deep. "Did you ever look for her?" I asked, hesitantly. He nodded. "I tried. When she disappeared from my life so suddenly, I felt like I had lost something important. But I didn't know how to find her, and I never knew there was a reason she left." I absorbed his words slowly, letting them settle into place beside the letter, the photograph, and all the years of wondering. Before I could respond, the lab technician entered, breaking the fragile stillness. The procedure was simple, a cheek swab, 2 samples, straightforward and almost anticlimactic. But the atmosphere felt heavy with meaning. When the technician left, Jonathan remained seated beside me. his hands clasped together as if holding onto the frame of the moment. "I don't want to overwhelm you," he said quietly. "But regardless of what the test confirms, I am grateful you reached out." It took courage. No one had ever said something like that to me before, not once in my life. I looked at him, unsure how to respond. "I just wanted the truth," I said. He nodded slowly. "So do I." The results took 10 days. 10 long days that stretched endlessly. During that time, I avoided Greg as much as possible. He sensed something was different, but he didn't know what. Whenever he looked at me, suspicion flickered through his eyes like a warning. My mother watched me carefully, sensing the weight of what I was carrying. She did not ask questions, but she lingered nearby more often than usual, as if anchoring me quietly. When the envelope finally arrived, it was thin and unassuming, yet heavier than anything I had ever held. My hands shook as I opened it. I took a deep breath and read the line that changed everything. Probability of paternity, 99.999%. My vision blurred as tears welled in my eyes. The truth, once a whisper beneath the surface of my life, now stood undeniable. I was not Greg's mistake. I had never been his burden. I had always belonged to someone else. Within minutes, my phone rang. I answered shakily. Madison Jonathan said, voice trembling. "I just received the results." I could not speak. "I want to be part of your life," he said. "If you'll let me. I won't push. I won't rush you. But I am here, and I'm not going anywhere." The tears fell freely then. After a lifetime of being unwanted, unvalued, unseen hearing, those words felt like stepping into warmth after years in the cold. The truth had finally found me. The moment the DNA test confirmed that Jonathan Pierce was my biological father, something fundamental inside me shifted. For the first time in my life, I had proof that Greg had lied, that his hatred was never about me being unworthy, but about me being living evidence of a truth he wanted buried. That knowledge should have made me feel powerful. Instead, it made me feel endangered, because the truth did not just free me, it threatened him. And men like Greg do not respond to threats with grace. They respond with war. It began quietly, a shift in the atmosphere at home. Greg's eyes followed me with a sharper edge, like he sensed I knew something he did not. He watched me when I moved through the house. He listened more closely when I spoke. He lingered near the kitchen doorway when I did dishes, as if waiting for me to slip up. I avoided him as much as possible, staying in my room with the door shut. My mother tried to keep the peace, but the tension in the house grew thicker with every passing day. At dinner one night, Greg tossed his fork onto his plate and leaned back in his chair, staring at me with narrowed eyes. "You think you're better than us now?" The room froze. My mother paled. Lorraine looked up sharply from her phone. Tyler glanced between us nervously. I kept my voice steady. "No, I don't." Greg's lip curled. "Then why have you been acting strange?" "Why have you been sneaking around?" I met his gaze without flinching, something I had never done before. "I haven't been sneaking." "I think you have." He snapped. The words were sharp, suspicious. Dangerous. I excused myself before he could push further, retreating to my room. I sat on the edge of my bed, heart racing, knowing it was only a matter of time before he discovered something he shouldn't. Unfortunately, I was right. 3 days later, I came home from school to find my bedroom door open. Greg never went into my room, not because he respected privacy, but because he didn't consider anything I owned worth checking. Seeing the door ajar now made my stomach drop. When I stepped inside, I knew immediately he had searched everything. My dresser drawers were slightly misaligned, my closet door hung open. My notebooks were not stacked the way I left them. Panic surged through me. I rushed to the loose floorboard in the closet and lifted it with trembling hands. The wooden box was still there. Greg hadn't found it. Relief washed over me so strongly I had to sit down, but the relief was short-lived. When I stepped into the hallway, Greg was standing at the end of it, arms crossed, expression hard. Looking for something. His tone was too casual, too controlled. I swallowed. My voice was barely more than a whisper. "Why were you in my room?" He shrugged. "House inspection." You think you get to hide things from me." I said nothing. My silence made him smile in that cold, satisfied way he had. "You forget this is my house. Everything in it I own, even you." A chill ran through me deeper than anything I had felt before. That night, I locked my bedroom door for the first time, dragging a chair against it just in case. I barely slept, every noise making me flinch. The next morning, the war escalated. Greg stormed into the kitchen where my mother and I were sitting. "Give me your phone." The command came without warning. Ice filled my chest. "Why?" He stepped closer. I said, "Give it to me." My mother tried to intervene. "Greg, please, she needs her phone for school." Greg slammed his palm against the counter, making both of us jump. "I am not asking." I handed the phone over because refusing would only make things worse. He scrolled through it with quick, angry motions. When he didn't find anything unusual, his expression darkened further. He tossed it back to me. Useless. But I saw the shift. He was not just angry anymore. He was paranoid. And paranoia is the match that lights an abuser's fuse. Later that afternoon, as I left for school, he called out after me. "Be home right after class. No detours, no stops. Understand?" It wasn't a request. It was a warning. Meanwhile, things on Jonathan's side were unfolding quietly, but swiftly. 2 days after the DNA results came in, Natalie called again. She said Jonathan wanted to help me legally. He wanted to ensure Greg could not use intimidation or manipulation to keep control over me. He wanted to meet with my mother to discuss next steps. I was shocked. Jonathan had known about me for less than a month, and he was already stepping into the mess of my life as if it were his responsibility. In a way, it was. But he didn't have to act on it. Yet he did. I thanked Natalie, though my voice shook the entire time. When I hung up, my mother sat down beside me on the couch, her hands trembling. I told her about Jonathan's offer. Tears welled in her eyes. "I should have told you sooner." Her voice cracked. "I should have left him years ago." She broke down, then crying harder than I'd ever seen. I wrapped my arms around her as she sobbed into my shoulder. For the first time, she whispered the truth aloud. "Greg threatened to take you if I left. He said no one would believe me. He said he'd make sure you never knew the truth. He said he'd destroy me." The words pierced through me, painful and heavy, but they also ignited something fierce inside me. Anger, determination, resolve. Greg had controlled our lives for 18 years, but the truth had finally cracked his power. And now he could feel it slipping. That night, as I tried to sleep, the weight of everything pressed against me. I had a biological father who wanted to help me. I had proof that Greg was not my father. And I had a mother who finally admitted the truth. Greg sensed he was losing control. And when abusers lose control, they get dangerous. I knew the war had begun. I just didn't know yet how far Greg would go to win. I had replayed Greg's threats in my head 1,000 times, but nothing prepared me for the night. Everything finally exploded, the night that would end with me unconscious on the hardwood floor and strangers lifting me onto a stretcher while my mother screamed my name. March 17th was supposed to be simple, my 18th birthday, a milestone, freedom at least in theory. I woke up with a strange mix of dread and hope swirling in my chest. My mother tried to make the morning special. She cooked blueberry pancakes, humming softly as if pretending our house was normal for just a little while. I thanked her, trying to match her smile, even though anxiety sat heavy in my stomach. Greg barely looked at me. He stood at the counter, chugging black coffee like a man preparing for battle. His eyes were bloodshot, his jaw tight. He already smelled faintly of whiskey, even though it was 7 in the morning. He walked past me and muttered, "Another year of feeding someone else's problem," then left for work without saying anything else. My mother winced, like she felt the words physically. I told her I was fine, but we both knew I was lying. That afternoon, small decorations went up for my birthday dinner. Nothing big, just a few balloons and a cake my mother bought with coupons. She whispered to me that she wanted tonight to be peaceful. I wanted the same, but peace and Greg had never belonged together in the same sentence. By 5:30, guests began arriving. Not for me, of course. Greg would never waste a celebration on me. The people filling the house were relatives of Lorraine's and parents of Tyler's friends. They came because Lorraine told them it was a casual family dinner, nothing more. No one wished me happy birthday. No one even knew. I stayed in the kitchen helping my mother finish a tray of baked chicken, while Greg sat in the living room with a beer in each hand, laughing too loudly at jokes no one else found funny. Every few minutes he glanced toward the kitchen like he was waiting for me to do something wrong. He was already on his sixth drink when Lorraine walked in wearing a sparkly dress like she thought she was hosting a gala instead of a family dinner in a suburban home. She kissed Greg's cheek, whispered something in his ear, and he smirked in my direction. My stomach knotted. Something about tonight felt off, very off. By 7, the house was full of noise. People talking, kids running music, playing from a speaker Greg insisted on blasting. I hovered near my mother like her shadow, avoiding Greg's line of sight. But eventually he noticed me anyway. He stood abruptly, beer sloshing over the rim of his bottle. "Hey, everyone, look who's finally out of her cave." He motioned toward me with a sloppy grin. "Birthday girl over here thinks she's too good for us." A few guests laughed awkwardly, not knowing whether he was joking or serious. I stared at the floor cheeks burning. My mother whispered, "Greg, please stop." He ignored her and staggered toward me. 18 years of feeding you. 18 years of dealing with your attitude. And you cannot even say thank you. His voice rose loud enough to silence the room. Tyler froze mid-step. Lorraine stiffened. My mother reached for Greg's arm. "Let it go. Please, Greg. It's her birthday." He jerked his arm away. "Exactly. The mistake finally turns 18. The word mistake hit me like a fist. The room went silent. Someone whispered under their breath. My mother stepped between us, voice shaking. "Greg, she is not a mistake. You will not speak to her like that." He sneered. "You want me to say, 'She is mine.' You want me to pretend. You want me to lie for you, Evelyn." My mother's face drained of color. I whispered, "Please, stop." He took a step toward me. His voice dropped to a harsh growl. "You think I do not know. You think I did not figure it out years ago. You are not mine. Never were." A ripple of shock moved through the room. Lorraine pretended she heard nothing. My mother reached for his shoulder again. "Greg, stop it. You are drunk." He shoved her hand away with enough force to make her stumble. Something inside me snapped. "Leave her alone." My voice shook, but it was the first time I had ever raised it at him. His head whipped toward me, eyes blazing. "What did you say?" I stood frozen, but I did not repeat myself. He stepped closer until he was inches from my face. "You think you can talk back to me after everything I have done for you?" I swallowed hard. "You have done nothing for me." That was the moment he exploded, his face contorted with rage. He shouted something incoherent and swung his arm. His hand cracked across my cheek so fast I barely registered the pain. The impact threw me sideways into a small table holding a glass bowl of fruit. It collapsed under me, the bowl shattering on the floor. Someone gasped. My mother screamed my name. I tried to push myself up, but Greg grabbed my upper arm, fingers digging into my skin. "Get up. I am not finished with you." My mother lunged at him. "Stop hurting her. Stop it." He shoved her again harder this time. She crashed into the dining chair, crying out. That was when Lorraine stepped in not to help us, but to protect Greg's reputation. "Greg, calm down. People are watching." He shouted at her to stay out of it. Tyler sobbed quietly behind the couch. My head throbbed. My cheek stung. My arm ached where he gripped me. I tried to pull away, but he clenched tighter. "You think you can embarrass me in front of everyone. You think you can walk around like you are better than your mother." I gasped in pain. "Let go. Please." My mother managed to crawl toward us, tears streaming down her face. "Greg, she is your daughter." "Please stop," he snarled. "She is not mine. Never was." That was the last thing I heard before he shoved me so hard my head hit the edge of the wooden bookshelf. A flash of white light. Then darkness swallowed everything. I do not know how long I was unconscious. Minutes. Maybe an hour. Voices blurred in and out of my mind. Someone shouting, "Call 911," someone else crying, my mother begging me to wake up, the sound of sirens in the distance. When consciousness finally slipped back in, I was floating somewhere between reality and numbness. The lights above me were too bright, the voices unfamiliar. A woman's voice said, "We have a pulse. Let's move." Hands lifted me. Cold night air brushed my face. Someone told my mother she could not ride in the ambulance because protocol required an EMT in her seat. My mother's scream echoed behind me as they closed the doors. I faded out again. The next time I woke, I was in the ER. A sterile white ceiling, medical machines, a nurse calling me sweetheart, a deep voice asking for permission to come in. And when the door opened, the man waiting outside was not Greg. It was Jonathan Pierce, my real father. The first thing I registered when I fully regained consciousness was the rhythmic beeping of the heart monitor beside me, steady but loud enough to anchor me in the room. The second thing was the antiseptic smell of the hospital, thick and cold, wrapping around me like a reminder that whatever had happened was real and not some distorted nightmare my brain had conjured. My head throbbed with a deep, pulsing ache, and when I tried to move, a sharp sting radiated across my ribs. The nurse noticed instantly and hurried back to my side. "Do not try to sit up yet, honey. You took a very hard fall." Her voice was warm but firm, the sort of tone someone uses when they know the person in front of them is fragile in ways that go beyond physical injury. I swallowed throat raw. "Where is my mom?" "She is here, sweetheart. She has been pacing the hallway since they brought you in, but we asked her to wait outside until you woke up. We needed to run scans first." The word scans made my chest tighten. Did he cause that much damage? Before I could ask, the nurse continued softly. "You also have another visitor. Someone who insists he needs to see you, but we did not want to bring him in until you were awake and stable." Fear hit me instantly, the kind that slams into your body before your brain can form words. "Greg. No, not him. Please do not let him in here. Please." The nurse's expression softened further. "Sweetheart, it is not Greg. He is not allowed anywhere near the ER bay. Security escorted him out when he tried to demand information about you." Relief washed over me so hard I felt nauseous. "Then who is here?" The nurse hesitated just long enough for my heart to start pounding again. Then she stepped back toward the door and spoke quietly to someone outside. "You can come in now." The door opened slowly, and I expected to see my mother. Instead, a tall man in a charcoal coat stepped inside, stopping just shy of the foot of my bed. His presence filled the room, even though he barely moved. His eyes were the first thing I noticed, deep-set, sharp, strikingly familiar. My breath caught. He removed his gloves and held them in one hand like he was unsure whether to come closer. "Madison," he said. My name left his mouth in a way that sounded both reverent and broken. "It is really you." I stared, unable to speak. My brain scrambled to make sense of the face I had only seen in a photograph tucked inside the wooden box under my floorboards. Jonathan Pierce. My mother's letter had been clear, but seeing him standing there in person felt unreal, like the world had tilted sideways and dropped a stranger into the center of my life. I looked at the nurse in confusion. She gave a gentle nod and quietly slipped out, leaving us alone. He took a careful step closer. "I know this is overwhelming. I know you have no reason to trust me or even want me here, but I needed to make sure you were safe." The ER light glinted off his silvering hair as he exhaled a shudder hidden beneath calm tone. When I got the call, I came immediately. "Call," I croaked. My voice barely functioned. "From who?" "My mother." Jonathan's gaze flickered with something heavy. "She told me you had been hurt, that Greg—" He stopped, jaw-clenching, as if the next words made bile rise in his throat. "When Evelyn reached out, I left a board meeting and got on the road within minutes. I did not even stop to grab a coat. Your mother is terrified. She thought you were going to die before the ambulance arrived." The thought made my stomach twist. "Why would she call you?" Jonathan inhaled carefully as if choosing every word. "Because she knows the truth now, the full truth, and she is done being afraid of him." The room spun slightly. Everything felt unreal, too bright, too heavy. I shifted, trying to sit up, but pain shot down my side. Jonathan moved instinctively, taking one step forward like he wanted to support me, but was afraid I would recoil. "May I help you sit?" His politeness felt strange in contrast to Greg's constant dominance, but I nodded. He gently adjusted my pillows, careful not to touch me unless absolutely necessary. His hands trembled once barely noticeable. Once I was upright, he stepped back again, giving me space. "I did not expect this moment would happen like this," he said softly. "Not here. Not while you are hurt." I blinked, still trying to wrap my mind around everything. You are really him." Jonathan chuckled quietly, but it was a sad sound. "Yes. And I am late. 18 years late." His voice cracked the slightest fracture. "But I am here now, Madison. I am here for as long as you will let me be." My throat tightened. Why now? Why not years ago? Because I did not know. He sank into the chair beside my bed like the weight of 2 decades had just dropped onto his shoulders. "Your mother never told me she was pregnant. I found out only months ago when my legal team ran a background search on an anonymous letter sender requesting DNA verification." I whispered. It felt impossible to reconcile the powerful man I had researched with the man sitting in a flimsy ER chair looking like a father who had spent years searching. "After the DNA test confirmed everything, I reached out to your mother, but she was terrified. She said Greg had threatened both of you for years." He looked away for a moment, swallowing hard. "She told me she wanted to leave him when you were 8, but he refused to let her take you. Said he would ruin her. Said he would take custody and bury her in court." I felt tears sting my eyes. Of course he had. It fit every horrible piece of him. Jonathan leaned forward, elbows on his knees, voice lowering. I tried to give her options. Lawyers, resources, anything she needed. But she said Greg watched everything. Phone, email, bank accounts. She said the only safe time to reach out was when he was not home. And tonight, she finally did. My heart hammered against my ribs. "So she called you as soon as Greg attacked me. As soon as she found you on the floor." Jonathan's voice grew tight. "She said there was blood. She said your head hit the wood. She said she thought she was losing you." His breathing stilled for a moment, and I realized I could not wait anymore. I had already lost 18 years. I was not going to lose you too. Silence wrapped around us, heavy and trembling. Then Jonathan looked up at me, eyes shining with something I had never seen from any man claiming to be family. Sorrow, devotion, hope. "Madison, I cannot undo the past. I cannot give you back your childhood. But I swear to you, I will protect you from now on." A tear slipped down my cheek, uninvited but honest. For the first time in my life, a man who shared my blood looked at me like I mattered, like I was wanted, like I was not a mistake. The hospital room felt like the first safe place I had been in years, but safety was never something Greg allowed me to keep for long. Even lying there under fluorescent lights, ribs aching and head throbbing, I should have known peace was temporary. Greg was the kind of man who treated losing control as a personal insult, and the night he was dragged out of the ER by security was only the beginning of the rage he would unleash. Jonathan stayed with me for hours, talking with my mother in the hallway, stepping out whenever the nurses needed room to work. The air between him and my mother was tense, thick with years of secrets, fear, and regret, but every time they exchanged a few quiet words, I could see my mother's shoulders loosen just a little. For the first time in her life, she had an ally who was not afraid of Greg. But Greg had always been good at playing the victim when it served him. He had always known how to twist narratives until he looked like the wounded party, and everyone else looked ungrateful. So when I woke up the next morning to find my phone buzzing non-stop on the bedside table, I already felt dread tightening in my chest. My mother picked it up for me since my arm was still sore. Her face drained as she read the notifications. "Oh no! Oh, Madison! What now?" I asked, already bracing myself. She hesitated before showing me the screen, and I understood why. In the span of less than 12 hours, Greg had begun a full-scale smear campaign. The first barrage came in the form of text messages to my principal. According to the forwarded screenshot the principal sent me, Greg had claimed I was emotionally unstable, violent, and prone to hysterical outbursts. He said I was lying about being assaulted. He insisted I was manipulating the school for attention. He had even suggested I was at risk of hurting other students. I had never even raised my voice in class. Jonathan read the message and muttered under his breath, "He is trying to get you flagged psychologically." My mother wrapped her arms around herself, trembling. He wants them to question her graduation. He wants to ruin her future before she can leave him for good. And he was not done. 2 more emails came from the university where I had been accepted for fall enrollment. Subject lines: concerning report, request for clarification regarding guardianship. Someone had called the admissions office claiming I had falsified my application, specifically the financial aid section that stated I was supporting myself. The message claimed I was lying about unsafe home conditions to gain sympathy and grants. They asked me to call before April 1st or risk losing my enrollment. My hands shook so badly I could barely hold the phone. "He is trying to block me from going to college," I whispered. Jonathan stepped closer to the bed, eyes darkening in a way that sent a chill through me. "He is trying to trap you under his control, but he will not succeed." My mother looked sick with guilt. "This is my fault. I should have left him when you were a baby. I should have protected you." I reached for her hand despite the pain. "Mom, this is not your fault. He trapped you too." But Greg did not stop at institutions. Lorraine got involved next. That woman always cared more about appearances than truth. By mid-morning, she had posted on Facebook a long paragraph dripping with self-righteous pity. She claimed I was exaggerating, that Greg had only been trying to discipline me, that I had thrown myself backward for dramatic effect. She said I had always been difficult, always jealous of Tyler, always trying to tear the family apart. The comments beneath her post were filled with her friends offering sympathy. "Poor Greg. That girl has always been trouble. Teenagers lie. She probably hit him first." Jonathan stared at the phone in disgust. "This is slander, pure slander." My mother's voice cracked. "They are trying to isolate her, make people think she is unstable so no one believes what he did." I already felt the emotional weight pressing down on me, suffocating like a hand around my throat. Every lie Greg spread carried the same intent to silence me, to make me small, to convince the world I deserved what he had done. It was his oldest tactic. Hurt me, then convince everyone the hurt was my fault. Jonathan paced for a moment, jaw flexing, then stopped at the foot of my bed. "Madison, I am going to call my attorney. Natalie needs to get ahead of this before he does more damage." I blinked, surprised. "Right now?" "Yes." He pulled out his phone. "This ends today." But Greg was far from finished. Half an hour later, a CPS caseworker appeared at the hospital door. She introduced herself gently, but her presence made my stomach drop. "We received a report last night, a claim that you may be in danger of harming yourself." "Greg," my mother whispered, horrified. "He filed a false report." The caseworker nodded sadly. "It happens more often than people think, but I still need to speak to Madison privately." My throat tightened. The fear was familiar, the fear of being disbelieved, dismissed, labeled dramatic. But then I looked at my mother, eyes red but steady, and Jonathan standing near the window, posture tall and protective. For the first time in my life, I was not alone. I spoke with the caseworker. I told her what happened. The ER doctor confirmed the injury pattern. The nurse corroborated my mother's panic and Greg's erratic behavior. When the caseworker left, she told me quietly, "You are not in trouble, and you are not going back there." Relief crashed over me so hard I nearly cried. But Jonathan said firmly, "This is not enough. He needs to face consequences. Serious ones." My mother nodded, tears streaming down her cheeks. For the first time, she looked resolute instead of afraid. "He will not hurt her again." And that was when I realized something had fundamentally changed. Greg thought he was attacking a girl with no support. He thought he still controlled every piece of my life. He thought he could bury the truth like he always had. But he did not understand what he had unleashed, because now I had my mother standing with me. I had Jonathan and his legal team. And for the first time in my life, I had power. The hospital room had quieted after the CPS worker left, But underneath that calm was a pressure so thick and suffocating it felt like it might split the walls open. My mother stood near the foot of my bed, arms wrapped tightly around herself, shoulders trembling in that soft, barely noticeable way that only someone who has spent years swallowing emotion would recognize. She kept staring at the floor as if afraid that meeting my eyes would crack something inside her that she might never be able to fix. Jonathan lingered near the window, giving her space but clearly worried. He was a man used to decisive action numbers and solutions, but nothing in his world had prepared him for watching my mother unravel inch by inch. Finally, I shifted slightly and whispered, "Mom." She froze. Her breath hitched. Then she exhaled in a sharp, broken rush and covered her mouth with her shaking hands before her voice shattered into a sob. "I am so sorry, Madison. God, I am so sorry. Please forgive me." My chest tightened instantly, instinctively. Seeing her fall apart like that triggered every protective impulse I had spent my life burying. Even injured, even bruised, even scared, I still wanted to comfort her. "Mom, it is not your fault." The words came automatically, the same reflex I had developed since childhood, because I had grown up believing I needed to protect her from Greg. But this time she shook her head violently, tears streaming down her face. "Yes, it is. All of this is my fault. Everything he did to you, everything he said. I should have stopped him. I should have left him. I should have gotten you out of that house when you were little. I let you down." Her voice cracked again, and she stumbled backward, grabbing the chair beside my bed before her knees buckled. Jonathan moved instinctively, reaching forward to help steady her. She let him because she was too drained to resist. Once she sank into the chair, she covered her face with both hands. My mother had always been a quiet crier, the kind of woman who wept soundlessly in the shower or while washing dishes when she thought no one could hear. But this time, it was different. This time, her sobs shook her entire body. This time, her pain spilled out like a dam bursting. I reached toward her, ignoring the sting in my ribs. "Mom, please look at me." She lifted her face slowly, eyes red and swollen. "Madison, I failed you." Her voice trembled. "Not just last night. Not just now. I failed you your whole life." I shook my head. "No. You were the only thing good in that house. You tried to protect me." She flinched. "Tried. But I never succeeded." She swallowed hard, forcing herself to continue. "You remember that time when you were 8 and he made you stand outside in the snow because you spilled milk?" "Yes," I whispered. "How could I forget? I stood at the window, hands against the glass, watching you shiver, and I did nothing." Her voice cracked into a cry. "I did nothing because I was afraid of making him angrier. I knew if I opened that door he might drag both of us outside, or worse." I clenched my jaw as the memory twisted like a knife in my stomach. "Mom, I understand. You were trapped. You cannot blame yourself for surviving." She shook her head again. "You do not know everything. There is more." Her fingers dug into her palms. "Things I never told you because I thought keeping the truth buried would make it safer for both of us." My heartbeat quickened. "What truth?" She hesitated, glancing toward Jonathan, then back to me. "There were things he did when you were a baby. Things he wanted to do to keep you under his control forever." A cold ripple crawled up my spine. "Mom, what things?" She inhaled shakily, bracing herself. "When you were 3 months old, I planned to leave him. My sister lived 3 towns away and said she would take us in. I had packed bags. I had hidden some of your clothes in the trunk. I was waiting for him to go to work so we could run, but he found out. He must have gone through my purse or listened to one of my phone calls." Her breath shook again. "He grabbed the birth certificate from my hands, ripped it in half, and burned it in the sink." Jonathan's face tightened, jaw rigid. "He destroyed legal documents." My mother nodded, tears dripping down her cheeks. "He said, 'If you ever try to leave with her again, I will file for full custody and make the court believe you are crazy.' He said he would tell them you were mentally unstable, that you had postpartum issues, that you were unfit." She swallowed again. "And then he said something I will never forget. He said, 'Even if she is not mine, she is mine now.'" My mother let out a sound that was half sob, half gasp. I believed him. I believed he had the power to take you, to hide you, to ruin you. Ruin. And he did everything he could after that to make sure I stayed afraid. Jonathan exhaled slowly, eyes narrowed, posture rigid. Evelyn, you were being abused. You and Madison both. That is not a failure. That is survival. She looked at him desperately. But I stayed. For 18 years, I stayed. I let him raise her. I let him hurt her. She turned back to me. I did not keep you safe. I should have told you the truth when you were old enough to understand. But I was terrified that if I said anything, he would do something worse. I reached for her hand. Mom, listen to me. You are not the one who hurt me. Greg did. Every bruise, every threat, every insult came from him. Not you. You did not choose any of this. He forced it on us. My mother shook her head, still trembling. You were a child who deserved protection, and I could not give you any. My throat tightened. Mom, you gave me love. You gave me warmth. You gave me the only soft place in that house. Without you, I would have been completely alone. She covered her mouth with her hand again as tears flowed. I leaned closer despite the pain. And now you are protecting me. You called Jonathan. You got help. You saved me last night. Her shoulders shook harder. I wanted to. For so long, I wanted to. But I thought if I stood up to him, he would kill me. Or kill you. Jonathan stepped forward, then voiced gentler than I had ever heard it. Evelyn, you protected her the way many abused women protect their children. You survived long enough to get her to an age where she could escape. You endured unimaginable cruelty. That is not weakness. That is strength. My mother blinked, stunned by the validation she had never been given in her entire adult life. He continued softly, but now it ends. You are not alone anymore. You have resources. You have support. And Greg is going to face consequences for what he has done. My mother pressed her trembling hand against her heart. Do you really think this can end? Jonathan nodded with certainty. Yes, because I will not let him bury either of you again. I took my mother's hand in mine. Mom, we are in this together now. She looked at me through her tears, something shifting behind her eyes. Something stronger, steadier. For the first time, she did not look afraid. She looked determined. And that was when I realized this was not her breakdown. It was her awakening. Jonathan stepped into the hallway to call Natalie, and the moment the door closed, the room felt strangely heavier, as if removing him exposed a raw nerve neither my mother nor I had fully acknowledged. She wiped her face with trembling hands while I watched her with a mixture of heartbreak and gratitude. Everything she had revealed still echoed in my head, but I forced myself to stay steady. We were finally pushing forward, finally stepping out of Greg's shadow, and now everything hinged on what Jonathan's attorney could uncover. When Jonathan returned a few minutes later, his expression had shifted. He looked focused, purposeful, with a simmering anger buried under the surface. Natalie will be here within the hour. She is pulling documents right now. My mother tensed. What documents? Jonathan sat down, exhaling slowly. Everything Greg touched. Every asset, every account, every legal decision involving Madison, and anything suspicious. My stomach tightened. Suspicious how? He looked at me gently. Things that do not add up. And knowing Greg, I guarantee there is a lot that will not add up. My mother's face went pale, as if afraid of what this might reveal, but I sensed something else beneath her fear. Hope. Real, tangible hope that maybe for once Greg would not be the one holding all the power. 45 minutes later, the door opened and a tall woman in a dark navy suit stepped inside. Her presence filled the room immediately, not with intimidation, but with sharp, competent energy. She carried a leather folder under one arm and a small laptop bag over her shoulder. You must be Madison. I am Natalie Grayson. I nodded, trying to steady my breathing. She shook my mother's hand next. Evelyn, I am glad you called when you did. Jonathan joined her near the foot of my bed. Did you find anything? Her lips curved into a tight, humorless smile. Oh, yes, quite a lot. She set her folder on the rolling tray table and clicked it open. Several documents were paper-clipped together and more were tucked inside sleeves. The first thing she pulled out was a printed email thread. She slid it toward Jonathan and spoke calmly, almost clinically. "This is an email Greg sent to his personal lawyer 4 years ago. The subject line reads, 'Steps to remove a non-biological dependent from inheritance obligations.'" My mother gasped, hand flying to her chest. "What?" Natalie continued, flipping to the next page. "He specifically asked whether he could legally exclude Madison from any future assets without revealing paternity issues in court. He also asked if removing her from the household before she turned 18 would nullify obligations tied to your late mother's trust fund." My breath froze. He tried to get rid of me as a child. Natalie's eyes softened slightly. "He tried to find ways to sever responsibility for you without raising suspicion. He wanted the benefits of keeping you in the house, but none of the legal obligations." My mother began crying quietly again, and Jonathan placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "What else?" he asked. Natalie pulled out bank statements next. "These clipped pages show withdrawals from the trust fund Evelyn established for Madison. That fund was supposed to be held in Greg's name only as temporary guardian. Total unauthorized withdrawals, $60,812.74 over the last 5 years. My mother collapsed into her chair. "60,000. Natalie nodded. The withdrawals were labeled as household necessities and medical expenses. She looked directly at me. "Based on our conversation earlier, you said Greg never paid for your SAT fee, phone bills, school supplies, clothing, or extracurricular activities." I shook my head. "I paid for almost everything myself." Then Natalie lifted another sheet and tapped it. "These purchases do not match your needs at all. They went to Tyler's soccer camp's private coaching sessions, multiple electronics, and travel team tournaments." She flipped to the last highlighted page. "He even used some of it to buy Lorraine jewelry." My stomach twisted in disgust. Jonathan's jaw tightened. "That is fraud," Natalie nodded. "It is misappropriation of funds allocated to a minor." "Very serious." She took out another paper. "Then there is this." My mother inhaled shakily. "What now?" Natalie placed a printed screenshot of a voicemail transcript on the table. 11 months ago, Greg attempted to contact an attorney about petitioning the court to declare you Evelyn mentally unfit due to supposed psychological instability. My mother covered her mouth, horrified. "Why would he do that?" Natalie answered evenly. "Because if you were declared unfit, Greg would gain full legal control over Madison and over her trust funds until she turned 18. The room spun slightly. It was not just emotional abuse. He was actively trying to trap us. Jonathan's face darkened. "There is more, isn't there?" Natalie took a slow breath, then slid out a document with a header that made my blood run cold. "Child Protective Services report." My mother whispered. "He filed a CPS report on her." Natalie nodded. "The report accuses Madison of emotional instability, violent tendencies, and intent to harm herself. It also claims Evelyn is encouraging these behaviors." My mother shook. "That is a lie." "He is framing us." Natalie continued. "He filed it the same night as the assault. He was creating a paper trail to make you both look unstable in case you went to the police." I clenched the blanket with trembling fingers. He was planning this for years. Natalie flipped one last page. "But I found something that changes everything." She held up a scanned copy of a letter. A letter with my mother's handwriting. My mother gasped. "How did you get that?" Natalie explained. "This letter was emailed from your sister's old laptop years ago, the one that was supposedly lost. It outlines Greg's threats, the destroyed birth certificate, and notes that Madison may not be his child." My mother covered her face. "I never sent it." Natalie nodded. "But you wrote it, and Greg tried to bury it. But a copy was backed up in an old email archive your sister kept." Jonathan exhaled slowly. "So you are saying we have DNA?" "DNA. Financial fraud, abuse patterns, false reporting, attempted legal manipulation, and concealed evidence." Natalie's voice sharpened with certainty. "We have enough to bury him." My mother sobbed quietly, but this time it sounded different. Relief. For the first time, relief. Natalie looked at me with calm determination. Madison, everything he has done to you, every lie, every threat, every bruise, it is all documented now. And this time, he is not the one in control. This time, you are. The days leading up to the gala were a blur of legal meetings, hospital checkups, and the slow, fragile rebuilding of something that resembled safety. My body healed faster than my mind. Every time a door clicked shut somewhere in the hospital corridor, I flinched. Every time a man's voice rose even casually, my heart lurched into my throat. But Jonathan never raised his voice. He never moved too fast. He never pushed when I hesitated. Instead, he brought coffee each morning and sat quietly nearby, letting the silence stretch until I was ready. My mother visited constantly, sometimes with soft apologies, sometimes with a newfound steel in her spine that made me wonder if I was watching her become a different person entirely. But no matter how much comfort surrounded me, the dread always returned when I remembered the gala. The Denver Business Foundation's annual Spring Gala had always been a glittering event covered in local media filled with CEOs and investors and dominated by people who cared more about reputation than humanity. And this year, Greg was supposed to receive an award there, Developer of the Year, an honor he had bragged about for months. But now, Jonathan was the lead sponsor, which meant he had a 10-minute spotlight on stage, and he had decided to use those 10 minutes to tell the truth. He had told me we did not have to go, that he could handle everything, that he would protect me from having to face Greg again. But something inside me felt different now. Stronger. Maybe it was the pain medication. Maybe it was the exhaustion. Or maybe it was finally being surrounded by people who believed me. Whatever it was, I told Jonathan I needed to be there. Not because I wanted revenge, but because I needed Greg to see I was no longer afraid of him. The night of the gala arrived too quickly. I stood in front of the mirror in the guest apartment Jonathan had given me temporarily, barely recognizing the girl staring back. My hair was half-pinned in soft curls. My makeup was subtle, covering the fading bruise on my cheek. The midnight blue gown Jonathan had given me fit like something out of another world. It was simple but elegant, cinched at the waist, the skirt falling softly to the floor. I had never worn anything so beautiful in my life. My mother stood behind me, fixing a stray curl. She wore a pale silver dress Jonathan's assistant had helped her pick out. It was the first time I had seen her look like herself. Not Greg's wife, not a scared woman. Just Evelyn. "You look stunning," she whispered, voice thick with proud emotion. When I turned to face her, her eyes glistened. "I am sorry, your first grown-up event has to be this." I shook my head. "It is not your fault, and it is not the event. It is the ending." She nodded, squeezing my hand. Jonathan and Natalie arrived a few minutes later. Jonathan wore a charcoal suit that looked like it belonged on a magazine cover. Natalie wore a sleek black dress, her hair in a knot, her expression calm and ready for battle. "You both look incredible," Jonathan said, his voice warm. Then he turned to me. "Are you absolutely sure you want to do this?" I took a breath. "Yes. I want him to see me standing." We drove separately. Jonathan wanted Natalie with him in case anything shifted unexpectedly. My mother rode with me. The gala was held at the Four Seasons downtown. Even from the street, the venue shimmered with warm light and elegant decor. Cars lined up in a slow procession at the entrance. When we stepped out, a valet opened the door and offered his hand. It felt surreal. Inside, the ballroom glowed with gold lighting. Crystal chandeliers reflected off polished floors, and guests mingled in clusters, champagne flutes in hand, laughter echoing like nothing terrible had ever happened in their lives. My steps faltered. These were powerful people, influential people, people who loved a scandal only when they were not inside it. My mother touched my back. "You are safe," she whispered. Jonathan joined us moments later, and with his presence at my side, I felt a little less like I was drowning. He guided us toward a table near the front where the sponsor tables were arranged. Conversations around us quieted as soon as people recognized him. Heads turned, eyes widened at the sight of us. Some whispered, some stared openly. Heat crawled up my neck, but I kept my chin lifted. I was not going to shrink tonight. A few minutes later, a familiar voice cut through the hum of conversation like a knife scraping glass. What is she doing here? My stomach tightened. Greg! He stormed toward us, face flushed, wearing a tuxedo that fit too tightly around his shoulders. His hair was slicked back in a way that made him look both desperate and arrogant. Beside him trailed Lorraine in a glittering red dress that looked more expensive than anything she deserved. She scanned the room with a tight smile until she saw me, and the smile evaporated into something sour. Greg pointed at me, his voice carrying across several tables. You do not belong here. And you, he jabbed a finger at Jonathan, you are trying to embarrass me in front of my colleagues. Jonathan's expression barely shifted. His voice remained calm, almost bored. You managed that yourself. Greg's eyes bulged. You think you can parade her in here like she belongs. She is nothing. A mistake. Guests gasped. Cameras lifted. Phones pointed in our direction. My mother instinctively moved closer to me, her hand trembling against mine. Jonathan took a step forward, his voice low but firm. If you shout again, you will be escorted out before the ceremony even begins. Greg scoffed. You do not have the authority. Natalie stepped in. Actually, he does. He is the lead sponsor, which means he has the right to request removal of disruptive guests. Greg blinked, momentarily thrown off, but then he recovered with a sneer. So this is what this is. You all think you can ruin my night. You think you can smear my name with lies. He looked straight at me, eyes full of venom. After everything I gave you, this is how you repay me. I gave you a roof. I fed you. I raised you. I saved you from your mother's bad decisions. My mother exhaled sharply in disbelief. Greg, stop. Do not twist this. But Greg raised his voice even more. You should all know she is lying. She always has been. Ever since she was old enough to talk back. The murmur in the crowd shifted. A few people frowned. A few backed away. Jonathan stared at him with icy disgust. You are humiliating yourself. Greg laughed loudly, eyes wild. No, you are trying to humiliate me. You made some ridiculous claim that she is yours. But she is not. Not legally, not biologically, not in any way that matters. She is a burden you are trying to dump on me. I felt something inside me shake, but I refused to look away. Jonathan stepped between us, voice steady and clear. The truth will be shared in a few minutes. I suggest you sit down and compose yourself. Greg shoved his face closer. Over my dead body. Jonathan stared at him with a coldness I had never seen before. Suit yourself. And he turned away. The MC's voice rang through the speakers, calling everyone to their seats. Greg glared at us one last time before storming back to his table, Lorraine hissing something at him under her breath. Jonathan guided us to our seats. My hands shook when I picked up my water glass. My mother covered my fingers with hers. You did so well, she whispered. But the hardest part is still coming. I swallowed. I know. The room dimmed. The spotlight illuminated the stage. The MC introduced the event, thanking sponsors, announcing the schedule, the silent auction, the awards. My heart pounded harder and harder. Then, she said the words that sent a bolt of electricity through the entire ballroom. Please welcome our lead sponsor, Mr. Jonathan Pierce. Applause rose like a wave. Jonathan buttoned his jacket and walked toward the stage with the calm confidence of someone who knew exactly what he was about to do. My pulse hammered. My mother squeezed my hand. I held my breath. This was it. The moment everything would come crashing down. Jonathan stepped up to the podium as if he had been preparing for this moment his entire life, though I could see the subtle tightening of his jaw, the resolve hardening behind his eyes. The ballroom grew still. Even the servers paused along the walls. Trays lifted midair as he adjusted the microphone. Thank you for being here tonight. Jonathan began, his voice deep and steady, carrying without force. The annual gala has always been an event celebrating progress, integrity, and the people who helped build this city into something we can be proud of. His eyes swept the room briefly, brushing past Greg's table. But tonight, I want to talk about something else. Something personal. A ripple of whispers moved across the room. Jonathan continued. 20 years ago, I made a mistake. A young man's mistake. I chose ambition over loyalty. I chased success at the cost of someone who mattered more than I understood at the time. I walked away from a woman I cared deeply for, and I did not know. He paused, breath hitching for the smallest fraction of a second. I did not know she was carrying my child. My throat tightened. Every head in the ballroom turned whispers rising like a low tide. Jonathan kept going, his tone gaining strength. 6 months ago, I received a letter from a young woman. Her words were brave, honest, painful. She had spent 2 years gathering the truth of her own life, piecing together a story that had been kept from her since birth. She asked me for a DNA test. She asked me for clarity. And she asked me for nothing else. No money, no favors, no promises, just the truth. Greg shifted aggressively in his seat, shaking his head, muttering something to Lorraine. Jonathan's next words sliced through the room. That young woman is my daughter, my real daughter, Madison Pierce. The gasps were instant, sharp, unmistakable. Chairs creaked as people leaned forward, phones discreetly lifted. Faces turned toward me with wide, astonished eyes. I felt heat rise in my chest as Jonathan extended his hand toward me. Madison, would you please join me? My legs trembled as I stood, but my mother squeezed my hand once. You can do this, sweetheart. I walked through the maze of tables, feeling hundreds of eyes follow me. The skirt of my gown brushed the floor softly, the sound swallowed by the silence. I climbed the steps and felt Jonathan's hand steadying my elbow. He pulled me gently to his side, facing the crowd with me. This is Madison, he announced proudly. From this night forward, she carries my name. She carries the truth, and she carries the strength of someone who survived 18 years of pain she never deserved. The murmurs grew louder. Someone near Greg's table whispered, My God, is that why Mercer has been acting so strange? Jonathan continued. Madison grew up in a home filled with fear, belittlement, neglect, emotional abuse. I felt my heartbeat pulsing in my ears, and some of that abuse came from a man many of you in this room know, a man who has built a reputation on charm and deals and handshakes, a man who was scheduled to receive an award tonight. A few people turned toward Greg, now suspicion growing. Jonathan's voice sharpened. That man is Greg Mercer! A visible shockwave rippled across the ballroom. Greg sprang out of his seat. That is a lie! Sit down, Jonathan replied calmly. Greg slammed his fist onto the table, rattling glassware. You cannot stand up there and slander me to make yourself look better. She is not your daughter. She is a manipulative brat who has been poisoning my family for years. The entire room recoiled. Jonathan remained calm, completely unfazed. Luckily, we have proof. Natalie stepped onto the stage, then her heels striking the wooden steps with crisp, confident precision. She carried a folder under one arm and walked directly to the podium. Good evening, she said, her voice carrying easily. My name is Natalie Grayson, legal counsel for Mr. Pierce and now for Madison. I hold in my possession the authenticated DNA test confirming 99% paternity. She raised the document slightly enough for the front rows to see. I also hold a notarized letter written by Evelyn Hayes Madison's mother detailing threats and coercion used by Greg Mercer to conceal Madison's parentage and maintain control over her household. Greg's face turned crimson. This is outrageous! Natalie ignored him. Additionally, we have bank records showing $60,000 withdrawn from Madison's trust fund and spent entirely on expenses unrelated to her well-being. That is misappropriation of funds allocated to a minor. Several guests gasped, turning their heads sharply. Someone whispered, That is a felony. Jonathan stepped forward again, voice calm but icy. And finally, we have emails from Mr. Mercer to his attorney discussing ways to sever Madison's legal protections, including removing her from the household to invalidate her rightful inheritance. Greg shoved his chair backward, the leg screeching across the floor. This is a setup. All of it, he pointed at me. She is lying. She has always lied. Ask anyone. Ask Lorraine. She knows. Lorraine, shaking, shrank back. Greg grabbed her arm. Tell them she is unstable. Tell them she faked everything. Tell them she hit herself." Lorraine's eyes went wide as she pulled her arm free. "Greg, stop! You are scaring me." He stepped toward the stage, pointing violently. "If you think you can turn everyone against me, you are both insane. This is my night, mine. I earned this. I built my career from nothing. And you," he pointed at me again with venom, "you owe me your life." My mother stood then, voice trembling but strong. "She owes you nothing." The entire room fell silent. Evelyn walked toward the stage, her step slow but unwavering. 18 years, she said, her voice barely louder than a whisper, yet somehow echoing across the space. 18 years I watched you hurt her. 18 years I stayed silent because I was scared. But I am done being scared. Greg laughed a high, manic sound. "Oh, spare me. You were always dramatic. You always wanted attention. That is why I never trusted you." My mother's chin lifted. "And that is why you are alone now." Greg lunged forward, his intention unmistakable. His hand lifted, palm open, aiming straight at me. But before he could reach the stage, 2 uniformed security officers intercepted him, grabbing his arms and pulling him backward. "Let go of me," he roared, thrashing violently. "This is assault. I will sue you. I will sue all of you." Jonathan stepped toward the edge of the stage. "You assaulted my daughter on her 18th birthday. In front of dozens of witnesses. You stole her inheritance. You emotionally abused her for years, and you tried to destroy her future out of spite. The consequences are already coming, Greg. This is only the beginning." Security dragged him toward the exit as he continued screaming, his voice cracking. "You are nothing without me. You hear me? Nothing. No one will believe you. No one will support you." But for the first time, the room did not look away. No one defended him. Not a single person followed him out. The moment the doors shut behind him, an eerie stillness settled into the room. Slowly, then rising like a tide, applause began at the far left table. Quiet at first, then louder, then swelling into a wave that filled the ballroom. I stood frozen, shaking, tears slipping down my cheek. Jonathan wrapped a steady arm around my shoulders. My mother stood beside me, eyes shining with relief. Natalie smiled faintly, nodding as if to say, "It is done." For the first time in my life, I felt the weight of Greg's power lift off me like a physical burden sliding away. I did not feel small. I did not feel helpless. I did not feel alone. I felt seen. I felt believed. And for the first time ever, I felt free. The morning after the gala felt unreal, as if the world had been scrubbed clean overnight and replaced with something unfamiliar. Sunlight streamed through the blinds of my temporary apartment, warm and soft across my face. A calm completely at odds with the chaos of the night before. I blinked awake slowly, my body still stiff from the injuries and the emotional whiplash. My mother was asleep on the couch nearby, curled under a blanket Jonathan had brought her, her breathing steady for the first time in years. Seeing her like that almost made me cry. I rarely saw her sleep peacefully without tension knotting her shoulders or fear tightening her jaw. Jonathan had insisted she stay with me, saying he would sleep at his place and join us in the morning. It was the first real night of safety either of us had experienced in almost 2 decades. But safety did not mean the storm had passed. It only meant the storm was now someone else's to weather. By 9 a.m., Natalie arrived with a leather briefcase, her expression crisp and unreadable. She greeted my mother softly and then turned to me. "The fallout has already begun," she said without preamble. "Greg was arrested this morning." My heart jolted. Arrested? For what? The list is long, but the primary charge is domestic assault. 2 witnesses from the gala came forward and voluntarily submitted statements to the police overnight. The hotel provided security footage, and the ER doctor filed an official report after reviewing your injuries. My chest tightened with something that felt like relief and disbelief tangled together. Jonathan walked in moments later, holding 3 coffees, his movements purposeful but gentle, like a man who had spent the entire night restraining his emotions through sheer discipline. He handed one to my mother, one to Natalie, and then held mine out with a small, soft smile. "You look stronger already," he said quietly. I laughed a little, the sound shaky. "I feel like I have been run over by a truck." He nodded. "Understandable. But you are standing. That counts for everything." Natalie set her coffee down and pulled out several printed documents. "There are updates, some of which are going to move very fast." My mother leaned forward nervously. "What now?" Natalie began organizing the papers without looking up. "First, Greg has been placed under a temporary no-contact order. The judge signed it at 8:15 this morning. He cannot come near you, Madison, or you, Evelyn. He cannot call, text, email, or send messages through anyone else. He violates that order, and he will be taken back into custody immediately." My mother pressed a trembling hand to her chest. Thank God. But Natalie was not finished. "Second, the board of directors at Mercer Holloway Properties held an emergency meeting this morning." My eyebrows shot up. They met already. "Yes." Jonathan folded his arms, his lips tightening. "Half their investors were at the gala last night. They saw everything. They heard everything. They watched security drag Greg out of the building in front of 400 people. Natalie nodded. By 7 a.m., videos had already circulated through private business group chats. An anonymous guest posted a clip publicly. "It has about 50,000 views already." My breaths caught. 50,000. More by now, Jonathan added. "People love scandal, especially when it involves a self-proclaimed success story imploding on a ballroom floor." Natalie slid another document forward. "As of 9:42 this morning, Greg has been suspended from his position effective immediately. The board is preparing to announce his termination pending internal review." My heart thudded in my chest. Termination. After all the years he strutted around bragging about how indispensable he was, the company he worshipped had thrown him out like trash. My mother exhaled shakily, staring at the table. "I never thought he would lose everything so quickly." Natalie's tone remained factual. "Men like Greg crumble the moment their facade breaks. Everything he had was built on intimidation and manipulation. The moment real scrutiny lands, the tower collapses." Jonathan added quietly, "Power built on fear never lasts, and Greg only ever ruled through fear." I swallowed hard. "What happens next for him legally?" Natalie clicked her pen. "Several things. The domestic assault charge will proceed, and given the evidence, he will likely be convicted or at least forced into a plea deal that includes mandatory anger management probation, a permanent restraining order, and a fine. But that is only the beginning." She tapped the next stack of papers. "We are filing a civil suit for misappropriation of your trust fund. Based on the evidence we uncovered, Greg owes you $60,000 plus interest at 8% over 5 years. That totals roughly $78,000. My mother's eyes widened. "He will not be able to pay that." Natalie shrugged. "That is not our concern. If he cannot pay, the court can garnish wages, seize assets, or place a lien on his property." Jonathan added, "And once the company officially fires him, future employers will see the charges and lawsuit. He will not find comparable work again." My breath caught. A strange mixture of justice and sorrow churned inside me. This was everything he deserved, everything he had earned through cruelty, and yet a part of me felt the remnants of childhood fear tugging at my chest. Natalie seemed to read my expression. "You are not responsible for what happens to him. He did this. Not you. Not your mother. Him." I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat. Jonathan rested a hand on the back of my chair. "There is more news." Last night's events sparked conversations across the business community. Several partners pulled out of projects Greg was spearheading. The company lost 2 major investors overnight. They want to distance themselves immediately. He paused, watching my reaction carefully. "His reputation is gone. Permanently." The room fell quiet for a moment, the weight of everything settling around us like dust. My mother whispered, "He always told me no one would ever believe me, that he could ruin me with one phone call." Natalie's mouth tightened. "Abusers always say that. It is their favorite lie." Jonathan stepped closer to her. "But he cannot hurt you anymore, Evelyn. You are safe now." My mother covered her mouth, tears rushing silently down her cheeks. I reached for her hand, squeezing tightly. Mom, he has no power over us now. None. Natalie pulled out another sheet. On top of everything, Lorraine has already contacted a divorce attorney. My mother let out a stunned breath. She is leaving him. Natalie nodded. She claims she fears for her safety and her son's. And in fairness, men like Greg often turn to the next closest target once their primary victim escapes. My mind flashed to Tyler. That sweet boy had already grown up watching too much. Maybe this was the best possible outcome for him, too, Jonathan said quietly. She and Tyler have moved in with her sister for now. They are safe. The news sat in me like a stone. Heavy. Real. Then Natalie spoke again. Madison, there is something else we need to discuss. I tensed. What is it? She folded her hands on the table. Your college situation. I froze, heartbeat stuttering. The university requested a meeting after Greg called them. Did that ruin everything? Natalie gave a reassuring smile. No. Quite the opposite. I spoke with the admissions director myself. They reviewed the police report, the hospital documentation, and your academic file. They issued an apology for any distress caused and have granted you early housing approval to ensure you have a safe place to stay. I felt tears rise unexpectedly. They believed me. They are supporting you fully, Natalie said. I wiped at my eyes. I never thought I would hear those words. Jonathan leaned closer, voice warm. You deserve every good thing coming your way. My mother nodded fiercely. Yes, you deserve a whole new life. Natalie stacked the papers neatly back into her folder. Greg is finished. Legally, financially, professionally, socially. He cannot touch you again, and everyone who matters knows the truth. Jonathan added softly, Justice is not always loud. Sometimes it is simply the quiet unraveling of a man who spent his whole life hurting others. I inhaled, slowly, deeply. For the first time in 18 years, the air felt easy to breathe. My mother squeezed my hand again, and this time her smile reached her eyes. It is over, she whispered. And I knew she was right. Greg had taken my childhood, my safety, pieces of my identity. But he would never take another day from me. Not now, not ever again. The weeks following Greg's downfall unfolded with a quiet steadiness that felt almost foreign after years of chaos, as if my life had finally shifted onto a track where every step was no longer weighed down by fear, but by possibility. I woke up each morning in the sunlight-filled apartment Jonathan had arranged for me temporarily, a space with soft beige walls, warm wooden floors, and a balcony overlooking the city skyline, where the sunrise painted everything in gold. It was my first time living somewhere without Greg's voice echoing down the hallways, without tension vibrating in the walls, without the constant dread of footsteps approaching my door. My mother had her own small guest room down the hall, and sometimes I would hear her humming in the kitchen in the early mornings, her voice tentatively rediscovering peace, like someone learning to walk again after years of crawling. She and I spent hours talking slowly, rebuilding the parts of our relationship Greg had shattered. We talked about the past, about the guilt she still carried, about the healing she hoped for. Some nights she cried, grieving the years we had lost, but more often now she smiled, her eyes soft and warm, in a way I had not seen since childhood. She began therapy through a trauma program Jonathan's assistant had recommended, attending sessions twice a week, returning home each time with a little more clarity and a little less fear. Watching her heal made me believe I could too. Meanwhile, my days filled with preparations for college, a reality that once felt impossible under Greg's control, but now stood firmly within reach. The university emailed me a detailed welcome packet including early housing approval scholarship adjustments based on my situation and an offer from the dean to meet once I arrived. My acceptance letter hung proudly on the refrigerator door, held up by a small magnet shaped like a sunflower. I read it every morning, still half afraid it might disappear if I blinked too long. With Jonathan's support, but not interference. I began shopping for essentials like bedding notebooks, a laptop, and small decorations that felt like pieces of a life that truly belonged to me. For the first time, I chose things not based on hiding or minimizing myself, but based on who I wanted to become. I picked soft lavender sheets because the color made me feel calm. I chose fairy lights because I always dreamed of having them, but knew Greg would have ripped them down. I chose a corkboard for my dorm wall to pin photos of moments I wanted to remember, and when I looked at the empty board, I felt a thrill in my chest at everything that would someday fill it. Jonathan supported me without overwhelming me. He walked beside me through stores, giving suggestions only if I asked, carrying heavy bags, offering calm encouragement when I hesitated over decisions. He told me repeatedly that he never wanted to replace the years Greg stole from us, but wanted to help build the years ahead. My relationship with him grew stronger each day, not rushed or awkward, but steady and respectful. Some afternoons we sat on the balcony while he told me stories about his childhood, about the mistakes he made, about the guilt he carried for not knowing about me sooner. I forgave him, not out of obligation, but because I saw the sincerity in his eyes every time he spoke, because he showed up when it mattered, because he believed me at my lowest without asking for proof. As the days passed, my mother grew close to him too. Sometimes I found them talking in the kitchen, their voices gentle and filled with mutual understanding. He apologized to her more than once for not being there when she needed someone to stand beside her. She forgave him as well, telling him that he had come into our lives exactly when he was meant to. Therapy helped me more than I expected. At first, I felt awkward sitting across from the therapist, unsure how to untangle years of pain into words, but she guided me patiently, allowing me to speak at my own pace. She taught me how trauma lingers in the body, how fear becomes a reflex, how shame settles where love should have been. She helped me understand that healing was not linear, that good days and bad days folded into each other like waves, and that moving forward did not mean forgetting the past, but freeing myself from its power. Slowly, I learned to sleep without nightmares, to breathe without panic, to laugh without guilt. One afternoon, about a month after the gala, my mother and I visited a small cafe downtown, a cozy place with plants hanging from the ceiling and soft music drifting through the air. She sipped her tea and looked at me with a softness I had never seen before. "You look happy," she whispered, almost as if she feared saying it too loudly would break the spell. And I realized I was. Not because my life was perfect or healed or finished, but because it finally felt mine. A few days later, Tyler reached out. His message was hesitant, clumsy, full of confusion and hurt and apology. He told me he had left Greg's house and was living with his mother's sister. He said he never realized how terrible things were for me until he saw Greg's meltdown at the gala. He wrote that he was sorry for not seeing it sooner, sorry for letting Greg pit us against each other, sorry for ever believing the lies he had been fed. I did not hesitate to forgive him. He was a child in that house, too, trapped in his own way. We met at a diner near the interstate, and we talked for 2 hours over milkshakes, slowly rebuilding the bond we lost under Greg's manipulation. He cried when he hugged me goodbye, whispering, "I want to be better, Maddie. I want to be the kind of brother you deserve." My heart cracked open in the best possible way. With college only weeks away, Jonathan suggested a small celebratory dinner. Nothing extravagant, just a moment to mark the beginning of a new chapter. He, my mother, and I went to a quiet Italian restaurant overlooking the river. The sun set in shades of pink and orange across the water as we ate, and for a moment, everything felt suspended in perfect balance. After dessert, Jonathan placed a small box in front of me. Inside was a delicate gold necklace with a tiny pendant shaped like a compass. "So you always know you are headed in the right direction," he said softly. Tears welled in my eyes as he fastened it around my neck. My mother squeezed my hand under the table, pride glowing in her eyes. On my last night before moving into the dorms, I stood on the balcony watching the city lights flicker. The old version of me, the one who lived in fear and silence, felt so far away. She might as well have belonged to someone else. For the first time in my life, I was stepping into something new. Not because I was running from danger, but because I was running toward hope. My mother hugged me tightly when we arrived at the dorm the next morning. Jonathan helped carry my bags. The room was small but warm, with a large window overlooking the campus lawns. Once everything was unpacked, my mother whispered, "You made it, baby. You are free now." Jonathan rested a gentle hand on my shoulder. "This is your beginning, Madison. Not defined by Greg. Not defined by fear. Defined by you." And as I stood in my new room, the sunlight pouring across the floor and the hum of student life echoing outside the door, I realized something powerful. My life had finally begun. The first semester of college moved by in a quiet rush of new routines, new faces, and a strange new sense of peace. I was still learning how to trust, like sunlight warming a room that had been dark for too many years. I spent my mornings walking under tall oak trees on the way to class, sipping cheap coffee in paper cups and relearning what it felt like to move through the world without shrinking, without flinching, without waiting for something bad to happen. My dorm room slowly filled with small reminders of the new life I was building. A corkboard covered in snapshots, a Polaroid of my mother smiling on the balcony of our temporary apartment, a picture of Jonathan and me at the riverfront taken on a quiet Sunday afternoon, a small drawing Tyler had made of the two of us as kids, stick figures holding hands under a scribbled sun. It was the kind of normalcy that once felt impossible. My mother continued her therapy, slowly piecing together the woman she had once been, before Greg swallowed her confidence whole. Some days she sounded lighter, almost cheerful, telling me about cooking classes she was taking or books she had started reading again. Other days she cried through the phone, letting out years of buried grief. But she was healing, truly healing, and I was healing with her. Greg's trial moved forward predictably, the evidence too strong and too public for him to escape accountability. He accepted a plea deal that included probation, mandatory counseling, financial restitution for the stolen funds, and a 5-year restraining order that barred him from contacting me or my mother. When I heard the final ruling, I felt neither joy nor anger, only release. Like a door that had been rusted shut all my life had finally swung open. It was not revenge, it was freedom. Yet even with his shadow gone, some nights old memories crept into my dreams. The shouting, the fear, the long quiet afterward. Trauma does not disappear simply because justice arrives. But now, when I woke trembling in the early morning hours, I no longer woke alone. My mother was only a phone call away. Jonathan answered every message within minutes. And I had friends now, real friends who laughed with me, studied with me, and invited me into their lives without suspicion or pity. One crisp October afternoon, as the leaves turned gold and the campus buzzed with midterm energy, I received an email from an address I did not recognize. A legal office. My stomach tightened instinctively. When I opened it, the message was short. Mr. Mercer is requesting a supervised meeting to apologize and discuss matters privately. Please advise how you wish to proceed. Sincerely, Manhattan Legal Mediation Services. I stared at the screen for a long time, the words blurring as my mind churned with a complicated mix of emotions. Anger, disgust, sadness, pity, and something else too. Detachment. Because for the first time, the idea of seeing Greg did not scare me. It did not control my breathing or my pulse. It simply meant nothing. I forwarded the email to Natalie. "Call me when you are free," she replied instantly. An hour later, we sat on a video call as she explained my options. "You are not obligated to meet him," she said. "You never have to see him again if you do not want to, and you do not owe him closure." I nodded slowly, but she also added, "If you choose to respond, we can handle it through counsel." I sat with the decision for 2 days. I walked the campus paths, sat by the fountain, talked with my therapist, and listened to my mother's gentle advice. In the end, I realized something important. Closure was not something Greg could give me even if he wanted to. Closure was something I gave myself. So I typed my response carefully, reading each word aloud before hitting send. "There will be no meeting. My boundaries are not negotiable. Do not contact me again." The message was sent through my lawyer, not from my personal email. It was calm, firm, unemotional. A line drawn without anger, only clarity. A week later, I sat in the campus library working on a psychology assignment when my phone buzzed. It was Natalie. "Just wanted to let you know," she said gently, "your father received your message. There will be no further requests." I thanked her quietly. When the call ended, I stared out the large window overlooking the quad. Students crossed the lawn, laughing bags slung over their shoulders, their breath forming pale clouds in the cool air. For the first time, I felt completely anchored in my life, in my choices, in my future. That night, I called my mother. We talked about her day, about her therapy, about the new recipes she was trying. Then she asked softly, "How do you feel after sending that message?" I took a deep breath, letting the answer rise from a place inside me that had taken 18 years to form. "This is not revenge. This is a boundary." She went quiet for a long moment. Then she exhaled shakily. "I am proud of you, Madison. So proud." After the call, I stepped outside onto the dorm balcony. The night air was cold but gentle, brushing against my skin like a quiet promise. I looked up at the stars, feeling small in the vastness, but also certain of something I had never known before. I was not defined by the man who hurt me. I was not defined by fear or trauma or survival alone. I was defined by what came next. My healing, my choices, my courage, my future. And as the wind rustled through the leaves below, I closed my eyes and let the moment settle inside me, steady and warm. The past no longer owned me. My life was finally, irrevocably, unquestionably mine. If you stayed with me until the end of this story, I want to speak to you directly, heart to heart, because what you just heard is not only my journey, but a reflection of something many people live with silently for years. Abuse does not always leave visible bruises. Sometimes it shows up in the quiet ways someone makes you feel small, unworthy, or undeserving of love. Sometimes it builds slowly through fear, guilt, and the belief that you owe someone forgiveness simply because they share your blood. If you have ever been made to feel like you were a burden or a mistake by the very people who should have loved you, I want you to know that you are not alone. So many of us grew up in families where the rules were unspoken, where protecting the peace mattered more than protecting the child, where the adults around us chose silence over courage. And maybe you, like me, learned far too early how to tiptoe around someone's anger, how to shrink yourself to avoid being hit with their words, or how to carry guilt that was never yours to begin with. If this story stirred something in you, it is not because you are weak. It is because you recognize the weight of surviving something you should never have had to survive. And maybe even now as an adult, you still carry the echoes of someone else's cruelty inside your heart. I hope my story reminds you that your past does not define the life you are allowed to have. No matter how long you spent in the dark, you still deserve light. You still deserve safety. You still deserve a future where your worth is not measured by someone else's wounds. If you grew up in a home where you were ignored, dismissed, or screamed at, I want you to know that none of that was your fault. Children do not cause adults to be violent. Children do not create the insecurities that adults project onto them. Children do not force someone to drink to lash out or to choose cruelty. Those were decisions made by people who should have known better, people who should have protected you, people who failed you, and their failure does not lessen your value. If anything, it proves your strength because the fact that you are here listening, understanding, and healing means you have already broken a cycle they never could. If my story touched something in you, if it made you remember a moment you buried long ago, or if it reminded you of someone who made you feel like you were less than you are, I encourage you to share whatever you feel safe sharing in the comments. You never know who might read your words and finally feel understood for the first time in their life. This channel has become a place where people from all walks of life find comfort and community, where strangers lift each other up, where many of you have experienced your own battles with toxic families, controlling partners, or parents who never learned how to love without hurting. Your story matters just as much as mine, and if you feel comfortable, I would be honored to hear it. Tell me where you are watching from. Tell me what time it is there. Tell me if you have ever had to set boundaries with someone you once loved deeply. Tell me if you ever had to walk away from a parent, a sibling, or a partner to save yourself. Tell me if you once stayed silent when you should have screamed, or if you forgave someone who never deserved it, or if you finally found the courage to say enough. Your voice could be exactly what another viewer needs to hear. And if you are still struggling, still living with someone who tears you down or manipulates you, I want you to remember something crucial. Leaving is not betrayal. Protecting yourself is not selfish. Setting a boundary is not disrespect. Choosing peace over chaos is not weakness. You are allowed to outgrow the people who harmed you. You are allowed to heal in ways they never did. You are allowed to redefine what family means to you, and if you need someone to remind you of that, let this moment be that reminder. You deserve to be loved without fear. You deserve a future that is bigger than your past, and you deserve to be surrounded by people who lift you up instead of break you down. If this story resonated with you, if at any moment you felt seen, heard, or validated, please consider subscribing so you do not miss the next chapter. This channel is more than just storytelling. It is a community. It is a place where people who have survived the unthinkable finally find the words they were never allowed to say out loud. And if you want to support these stories so that more people can find comfort and courage in them, liking the video helps far more than you know. It tells the algorithm that this message is worth sharing, that these conversations matter, that healing deserves a space in the world. And lastly, before you go, I want to say one more thing. Whether you are watching this from a small town in the Midwest or from a city on the coast, whether you are tuning in late at night because you cannot sleep or during a quiet moment in your day, I am grateful you are here. I see you. I value you. I admire the strength it took for you to survive everything you survived. And no matter what anyone once told you, you are not a mistake. You never were. If you would answer one last question in the comments, I would love to hear it. If you were in my shoes, would you have given Greg a second chance, or would you have walked away the same way I did? Your answer might help someone else find the clarity they need. Thank you for listening. Thank you for being here. And please take care of yourself.